here. Everybody else is. Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Commissioner Teddimer will do that. Please stand.
Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So the next item on our agenda is public comments. These are public comments related to things that are not on our agenda. If anybody wishes to speak in public comment, you need to fill out one of those blue forms and present it to the staff over here. You'll have 3 minutes in conformance with the Brown Act, and no action can occur on your subject since it's not on our agenda, okay? But if you do want to speak on something on the agenda, got to do the same thing, the blue form, and you can come up and speak on that when we get to it on the agenda, okay? Do we have any public comment speakers tonight?
Yes, sir. Heiko Peschel, followed by Roger Gregson.
Okay. Hello, Heiko.
Good evening, gentlemen and ladies, commissioners and staff. Heiko Peschel, Foothill Ranch, and I am sort of going to touch lightly on an item that's on the agenda later because I won't be able to be here. I have another meeting. But in reference to stop signs instead of traffic lights, I'm all in favor of stop signs, and we'll leave it there. I would like to commend the commission on things that have been happening here in the city. I think we're moving a long way in a positive direction. I would like you guys to take another look up in our way. Not so much the traffic lights or stop signs as, well, for example, where I live off of Yves, which is on the right-hand side of Foothill Ranch above the church. And to get off of Yves onto Rue de Valor, I have a blind look to the left. I can't see anything coming in from the left. The speed limit is 35, real speed anywhere from 30 to 50, depending. Makes it very difficult. I think there's only been one accident in the time I've been there, but it surprises me that there aren't more. The other aspect of it, if you guys have any influence with our police services, we would like them to come up and visit us more often and keep an eye on what's going on up there. Anyway, with that, have a good Christmas, and we'll hopefully see you next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Roger Gregson, followed by Daniel Whedon.
Good evening, Commissioners. First of all, thank you for your service to our community. It's appreciated. Just have 3 quick suggestions that I wanted to come and make to you this evening. I live here in Lake Forest, just off of Trabuco and Peachwood. So just for reference, Peachwood is the first signal this side of Lake Forest. There's a development going on at the top of the hill that's been underway for a long time in the planning and such. But there's always been an issue at Palmwood and Peachwood. So Peachwood is where the Edison substation is. Palmwood is the first street that intersects. Palmwood actually intersects Peachwood twice at the kind of what I would call the bottom of the hill and then up at the top of the hill. I think there's been some consideration of a traffic signal at Palmwood and Peachwood. While that may eventually, especially with the additional homes at the top of the hill, may become necessary, I would encourage an intermediate, much less expensive step, which I think may be just as effective. So there's 2 lanes in each direction on Peachwood. Going up the hill, if the number 2 lane were made a right-hand turn only at Peachwood, it would alleviate what I believe has been a dangerous situation there for a long time. There's been at least 1 fatal accident, sadly. There's been other accidents. I don't know this; it's all that frequent. But the expectation, as you're setting on Palmwood to turn left onto Peachwood coming out, is that people in that right-hand lane, 80–90% of them make the right-hand turn, 70% of those with no signal on. So it's ripe for an accident. I think it could be simply addressed with some paint, make it a right-hand turn only, and use some of those plastic pylons like are on Lake Forest, just by the Ralph Center, on Trabuco, just before Lake Forest, next to the Ralph Center. So that's my suggestion number 1, is make that a right-hand turn only lane. Suggestion number 2, further down Trabuco toward El Toro, is to kind of replicate what you've done on Trabuco just before Lake Forest. With the plastic pylons again, I constantly, and that's a very, very busy intersection, of course, at Trabuco and El Toro, but coming out of both the 76 station and then next to Chipotle across the street and the mobile station, it's amazing how many people want to come out of those centers and make a left-hand turn onto Trabuco. It could be very simply and inexpensively, I would assume, done by using the plastic pylons down along the center divider there. So that's suggestion 2. Suggestion 3, Peachwood Park, back to kind of my neighborhood. So up the hill on Peachwood, there's a park that's adjacent to the street. Has no dedicated parking for it whatsoever. It's just the street parking that's there. I would suggest that marking a zone for no overnight parking, and it would open up. Otherwise, that's just a walk-to park. You can't get to it because people are parking there, and people, they're especially on weekends, there are commercial vehicles there over the entire weekend. So that's it. Thank you for your attention. Have a great Christmas and a Happy New Year. Take care.
Thank you. I do know that we, staff is looking at the Peachwood situation very carefully, and one of the things they're looking at is that right turn lane that you suggested. It's going to take a while to get it all wrapped up, but that is one thing. And I think they're also looking at by the 76 station, making that a median so that people can't make that left out of there. Thank you.
Daniel William.
Good evening. I sent a summary to Dave Rogers as well as Jordan Villawak. Sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. If any of you guys didn't receive it, I do have additional copies available. I live on Sky Drive, which is a small residential street. It has 16 homes, roughly 14 street parking spots available. Back in May, the street began to become overwhelmed with with apartment overflow parking. But in addition to this, we also had 2 houses on our street that had a tremendous amount of cars, one of them having 9 vehicles, including a recreational vehicle, one of them renting out multiple rooms of the house to many other individuals and families, causing that house to have 8 cars on it. In August, the street was able to vote on permitted parking. The permit parking memo that went out with the ballot clearly stated that each resident would receive only 2 parking spots because the city believed that each dwelling unit should have existing off-street parking otherwise, and 2 should be sufficient. The street did successfully pass or vote for permitted parking, and in October, when we received our permits, there was an additional memo that stated a 3rd permit could be requested and would be granted at the city's discretion if unusual or extraordinary conditions existed. Earlier this month, I learned that 2 houses were granted a 3rd permit. They happen to be both the houses with the excessive number of cars, the 9 cars and the 8 cars. I spoke with Sarah Rodriguez, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing her name. She did confirm that they were issued additional passes. She did not know the reason. I asked if having 9 cars was a justified reason. She said absolutely not. She didn't know to call back on Monday and to speak with Doug Anderson. I did, and he confirmed that the reason was because they have a lot of cars. While I am not opposed to anybody having multiple cars, I think that if they have an excessive amount of cars, the burden should be on them to find additional spots for that or to store the recreational vehicle, and that the city should have some sort of existing guidelines for when they're going to issue that extra pass, and it should not be at the burden of the remaining residents. By having only 14 parking spots and allowing 2 homes to have 3 each, one of which stores 3 cars at all times on the street, it creates a huge burden for the remaining 14 residents. There's roughly 8 parking spots left open for visitors or for those residents. And it's extremely subjective. Doug told me that there was another house in Bennett Ranch, which is a nearby community, that had a preschool in their garage, and they wanted an extra pass to be able to park a 3rd car on the street, and they were declined. So this idea of when a resident is going to be granted a 3rd pass is extremely subjective, and I think leads to favoritism and should be actually documented. And I feel like the residents who are affected by this should have some sort of say in the matter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So later on in our agenda tonight, we're talking about that revised parking policy, and that's a great time to talk about exactly what you're talking about.
Should we stay?
If you'd like to stay,
Yes, thank you.
you're welcome. Any more?
That's it.
Okay. Next item on the agenda was the consent calendar. These are routine items, usually approved as a group by one vote. Is there any public wishing to pull a consent calendar item?
Yes, sir. Number 7.
That's not consent.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's discussion. Sorry.
Is there any?
No. Nobody pulled any consent calendar. Nobody pulled any of the consent items.
Okay, thank you. Is there any commissioners that wish to pull a consent calendar item?
I do, Mr. Chair. I'd like to pull item number 3 and item number 4.
3 and 4. Any others? So a motion would be ordered to approve 1, 3, and 5.
Mr. Chairman, staff would like to pull number 2 for a quick discussion.
Staff wants to pull 2. Okay, so we'll we'll do 1 and 5 then. Commissioner Teddemer moved the items 1 and 5, seconded by Commissioner Morper. All in favor, or please vote.
Yes. Okay. The motion carries unanimously with, I think the name tags. Well, yeah, with Commissioner Pequeño absent.
Wonder how he got a yes.
Oh, his thing is.
All right,
weird.
I'm out here. We'll straighten this out.
So switch Pequeño.
We'll fix it.
He can have my yes.
Okay, staff pulled item number 2.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, we want to have a real a brief discussion about our tentative meeting on December 27th. At this time, we have 2 rather weighty and meaty items currently scheduled for that. And unfortunately, each of them is going to require an extensive amount of staff time to compile, analyze, and come up with recommendations as well as kind of complete the entire process. And just from a staff's perspective, I don't think we're going to have time to put those 2 items together in a way in which we would think would be appropriate to present to the Commission. In addition, we also heard from Commissioner Pequeño that he will not be able to attend Commissioner Pequeño will not be able to attend the December meeting regardless because he has family commitments over the holidays. And of course, one of our commission members has recently been elected to City Council, and so he will be moving on to that, which means at the most we would have 3 individuals here. And with these items and some of the recommendations that can come out of it, it might be better to wait until we have the full commission here in order to have that discussion and make recommendations, many of which could potentially affect the capital improvement program that the Commission will be reviewing in January. So we're not saying we want to cancel right now. We'd like to give us a week or so to kind of figure out where we're at on that, but it looks as if we're headed in that direction in terms of not being able to present those 2 items that would really be the final 2 for that particular meeting.
So you wouldn't be able to do both of them, or you couldn't do either of them?
Honestly, I don't even know if we could get one out. Both of them require a lot of, again, extensive research and analysis. For instance, the traffic collision analysis, we just, literally this week, I just finally got the data dump for all the collisions from 2017 from the CHP. So first step is you got to go through all of that data and make sure it's correct in our database, and then you have to start your analysis within that. So the other one is our first ever traffic signal master plan here, and again, I've got raw data, but there's a lot of work to do to compile all of that, create kind of the scoring system that we're going to use for ranking those intersections, and honestly, I haven't even had a chance to touch that one yet. So there's just an awful lot of work that needs to get done. But again, we're not suggesting at this moment cancel it. I just want you to be aware that we're going to go back. Tom and I had a conversation earlier today about kind of where we were at, and he said, well, let's bring it up. Let's discuss it with them. let them know kind of where we're at on a staff level, and let's kind of see where we're at in a week, and reach out to the commission at that point and see where we're at.
Comments from commissioners?
I think there's another variable. The fact of the matter is, there's a couple of us that have term limits, so to speak, and I believe that.
That's true. That's you think about it. Yeah, there's several of you that are reapplying as a result of the election. So that's a good point too. Perhaps when everyone is, in your case, obviously hoping that everyone gets reseated, but that's true. You may have at least certainly one new member.
But he'll be replaced, though, as I understand.
On the
5th. I could be wrong, but that's
it's my understanding that the open period for reapplying and for new members to apply is from December 1st to December 31st.
Okay.
With the seating of the commission, full commissions, whether it's yours, the Parks and Rec, or the Planning Commission, as part of the first meeting in January. So, first or second meeting in January, and therefore, at that time, obviously, because our meeting's here at the 4th, you'd actually. That new seating, whatever it looks like, that would be available for our next meeting in January. So that's a good point, Mr. Morper.
Is there another one of these items that are booked, that are scheduled at least, that could substitute for what you're talking about?
Well, there's a third one listed there, operations educational item. We actually slid that into tonight's presentation because it's all about traffic signals. So that one doesn't even exist anymore. And obviously the capital improvement program, which is the really kind of heavy hitter item for January 24th, is going to take a lot of effort to get that one prepared. And honestly, we want to make sure that anything, like I said, is the master plan and the collision review sometimes have capital project elements or components or recommendations in them. So we'd want to make sure that those recommendations were folded into that report, or at least part of the same discussion. I think it would work well. So at this point, we don't have, other than the two big items, I don't have anything in the can for the traffic calming one or the intersection roadway one either at this point. Some of these I had done before with other groups, others I hadn't. The next couple of ones, I have to create them from scratch in terms of educational items.
So, Commissioner Tedemer, would you be at the meeting in December as a traffic commissioner, or you can't do both? I don't know. I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's our understanding the answer is, it's been asked, actually, and the answer to that question from the city attorney's office is no.
No, okay.
So he will definitely be,
so
that seat.
At the best case, there's going to be 3 of us here.
At the absolute best case, there'll be 3 of us here.
So,
Mr. Chair. My only concern, and I definitely appreciate the amount of time and around the holidays, and I think that that's probably the direction we might be moving in, is that the reality, too, is that coming in January, there could be 4 new commissioners with me up here, meaning we're going to go back to page 1 like we were 4 months ago. And if there's some important items that need to be moved on, that I don't know what the plan is of staff, if we're going to refresh and have the Brown Act presentation and we're going to do everything through that, things are going to change here, and I'm going to talk about that as the next item. But
yeah, well, we would definitely add, we are, the time frame associated with the capital improvement program and other items associated with it needs to be front-loaded, because realistically they would look to adopt that in June, and so we got to move. And so in terms of staff's thinking, whatever the makeup is in January, we would probably do some truncated Brown Act, because we're going to have at least one new member, and try to keep that as relatively short as possible. But staff is looking to have those 3 items, currently thinking if we can't get these moving in time for the December meeting, have those 3 items queued up for the new commission.
So, David, the reality is, does 3 members want to have a very important discussion about traffic signal master plan and the collision thing, and then we're going to start all over in January? And frankly, if there's only going to be 3 of us here, I don't want to do anything personally extremely important with only 3 members. it doesn't make sense to me to do that. So
I think
I'd
there's
rather
some
not
there's
have
some
a
there's some
meeting.
wisdom to that thinking also in terms of total number of members and perhaps a different makeup, a slightly different makeup of the commission in
I would be
January.
very uncomfortable voting on some major program with 3 members here, although as much as I want to, I really want to get this moving. We've got so much to do, but it could all change in January. So
Assuming the commission continues, which is also not maybe the elephant in the room too, is this is going to come up again in 2 years. We need to think in terms of that with new commissioners, potentially.
True, but at least now you'll have, I mean, a 2-year run. And that's a lot. That's a lot of time and a lot of good things and a lot of continuity can occur over that period of time. It's just, this group this commission was formed relatively late, and you just feel like kind of getting in a groove, and something's going to happen. So we're just not quite sure where we're there. But once everything settles in January, then that group, like I said, that you've got continuity for 2 years, and you get a lot done.
So we could have 2 motions here. We could have a motion to keep December or stop December or cancel it.
I'll go with the staff recommendation. I agree with you. I mean, why?
So you are making a motion to cancel the December 27th meeting?
I think so.
I'll second. Any further discussion? Please vote. Darn. Uh-oh, is our voting clicky things not working?
Yeah, hold on. Wait, where's...
Oh, we might have to go old school here.
So let's just raise hands or say yes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? You're going to, Commissioner Teddemer's abstaining?
The motion carries with Commissioner Teddemer abstain and Commissioner Pequeño absent.
If I could, I'm just abstaining because I won't be here, and so
I
want to
totally
let folks
understand.
decide. Makes most sense.
So next is the consent calendar item pulled by Commissioner Vilwalk, Traffic and Parking Commission Areas of Interest, item 3.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to try to make my comments brief. It's on the issue that I have under my name of evacuation planning. And as we've seen recently, another example of how impactful disasters can be to communities. And just going back the last couple of years, disasters have occurred more often than they ever have before. They've cost more money than they ever have before. And in California, this most recent event in Paradise has the most death than any disaster by wildfire in California before. And we need to stop kicking the can down the road, and we need to actually start getting together and making some plans and making some movements to be prepared for our community. And we can see even today, after the Holy Fire that occurred this summer, there was a lot of rain that we saw today that came down, and they had to put in a mandatory evacuation order to Trabuco Canyon, and they had to evacuate that. And luckily for Trabuco Canyon, they have a plan that's in place and how that gets implemented, how they communicate to those residents, how they direct them out of the area, the shelters that they can set up. There's a collaborative approach, and there's a plan, and everybody involved understands what that plan is and moves forward. So with that, the item isn't until March, and I don't think it would be in my conscience just to sit up here and not have some type of opinion to make that occur a little bit faster. So with those comments, I'd like to make a motion to recommend to City Council to establish an ad hoc committee to start the process to begin conversations and drafting an evacuation plan that will include an alert and warning piece, a sheltering piece, as well as collaborative planning with the city staff to make sure that everybody is on the same page. And the part of the planning process that's so important, why I would not want to hire a consultant, is the part of the process is to make sure everyone understands what's in the plan and how it works and how it operates, to make sure that we're all on one page. So with this committee that I'd like to recommend to City Council to establish, I'd like it to include the City Manager, the Director of Public Works, Chief Valentine, the Orange County Fire Chief, the City's Emergency Manager, Mayor Pro Tem Basil, and Commissioner Reichert to accompany me on this ad hoc committee, and I'd like to see what everyone's feedback is on that so that we can come back in March when it's written on here as a discussion item for us, that we could have something to share and some meat to a plan to present and to move this forward.
I think that would actually be an appropriate discussion on one of our items here where we talk about the Commission's report to the Council in January. It's designed to kind of go over what the Commission had done in the past, but also to ask Council for direction going forward. And that feels to me like that request would fit nicely into that report in January to the Council as something you could present to them to consider. Now, that would obviously require a vote of the Commission as a whole to do that, but in terms of what you're requesting as of this moment, and because of the type of item, this is really kind of a summary place. It feels like it fits better into that for a more thorough discussion on that, if you don't mind kind of postponing a little more discussion on that until that item.
I don't know. It's one of our pending items that we've talked about for several months, and he has a lot of expertise. He does the same job for the city of Laguna Hills, and it's something that I think we need to get started. It's basically, if I understand your motion correctly, recommending to the city council that they establish this committee. And they can say yes, they can say no. I mean, it wouldn't go to the city council till sometime in December anyway, and by the time the committee gets going, it's January. So I don't know why we would delay. It's just a recommendation.
Yeah, I'll let Tom go. I'm no parliamentarian, but it feels like that's the kind of thing you'd have to have a standalone item with that potential recommendation to give the public and others an opportunity to speak to it, where if it's included as in that item that we're talking about now in the annual report, that's kind of where that dovetails, but that requires waiting
You're
until...
suggesting we just discuss it later in the annual report.
I think, to me, and Tom, feel free to step in at any time, but it feels like that discussion, that request, that recommendation to council to form a committee and some of the other things that we're talking about here seems to me would fit nicely into that report that goes to the council in January, saying, here's kind of a summary of what we did, here's some discussion items we'd like direction on or for you to move forward on. And that's feels like that's where it fits, as opposed to it kind of where I feel like I'm at right now, which feels a little bit out there in terms of whether or not that was proper notification. If
It's
you're
the same result, right?
Correct, but under a different item, and it feels like...
You okay with that?
I don't necessarily agree with that. That's okay. I think that it can be done as a separate agenda bill to City Council. It would allow the public at that time to make comments on it, as that would be an item that would come before City Council to decide. I don't think it should be tied into the January report, because at that point I could be the only one there that's giving that January report, or they would be 4 new commissioners possibly at that time for that January report to the to City Council.
Let me, if I may, let me jump in here. I think we have a Brown Act issue about notification. So I think what we've got here is you've got a standing consent calendar report of, hey, the commission has asked for a presentation in March, and from that we want to bring back a commission, so, or a subcommittee of the City Council. So I don't think that was properly notified for the public to know about this or hear about this. I think that's the issue we're struggling with. I think when the City Council created the Traffic and Planning Commission and the other commissions also, they've tasked the commissions with certain objects, right, in our code, but also to come back to them once a year with a report of what you've done and with a report of what are your ideas that you'd want to do. And that's item number 11. So to me, it's perfectly set up for exactly that, to come back and say, hey, as a commission, we're concerned about this. I'd also be slightly concerned that perhaps evacuation route is more under emergency services than under traffic and parking, and that we're getting a little bit out of the scope of perhaps what the Traffic and Parking Commission set up to do. So there's a few things maybe out of scope that I'd want to run past the attorneys to make sure we're doing it correctly. But I think it's perfectly set up, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes, to say this is something important to us. We recognize it. Council, here's our suggestion, and bring it up and let the council decide that way. I think would be, achieve your results and keep us clearly out of any potential trouble.
Yeah, I think we can just move this to the discussion about the recommendations to the city council later on in the agenda. It probably fits better there. Okay, and the last thing you pulled was the ALF tickets, Ask Lake Forest tickets. Oh, yes.
I'll move that item. Item 3.
Commissioner Vilwalk moved item 3, seconded by, I'll second it. Oh, please vote if the thing works. If not, we'll do it by voice.
Hey, there we go.
Okay, hold on. No,
Oh, it worked. There you go. Okay, ALF tickets, item number 4, pulled by
motion carries
Commissioner Vilwalk.
Okay, I just want to make a brief comment on the first one that's on there regarding Rancho Parkway over across from the Baker Ranch Community Park. And my only question on this was, you know, it talks about, I think Mr. Anderson responded to it, when was the last time a study was actually conducted on Rancho Road? That this is a road I travel pretty frequently. It's a beautiful park that I bring my kids to. I know there's apartments on the other side. I'm all about pedestrian safety as well and getting these people from point A to point B. And I don't know if we don't put a crosswalk in there because it avoids the apartments from parking in that parking lot at the same time. But I want to hear when the last time the study was. And
yeah, the last time the study was done was last summer. We had looked at it after we had put up the crosswalk warning signs there. You see the PED signs that are out there, PED crossing warning signs we had put up, and those were about a year and a half ago. We had put those up. We actually look at it about every 6-month interval. Previous to that, we had removed all the parking in the park overnight for the same reason. We had people crossing in the middle of the night out there. There were complaints from those. We'll probably look at it again right after the first of the year. We actually count the PEDs that are out there, try to get a feel for how many people are crossing, what are crossing. We try to do one in the summer and one in the winter.
that's all. I'll move the rest of the motion.
Okay, so you're
the item.
moving item 4? And seconded by Mr. Teddemer. Please vote. Item 4. Hey, progress.
That motion carries unanimously with Commissioner Pequeño absent.
Okay, next item on the agenda is a traffic modeling presentation. So if you're here to speak, let us get through this traffic modeling thing. It'll only take 3 or 4 hours. I'm only kidding.
Okay, we have our traffic, or consulting firm, Stantec Consulting, is the one that operates and maintains and basically takes care of our model for us here. Very briefly, our traffic model is designed to predict future traffic conditions in an area, city, or region. It's done to identify where traffic conditions at roadways or intersections will exceed the level of service threshold established by an agency. Our particular model here was established as part of the Opportunities Study area, which is, basically the conversion of many of the land uses in the city from that were previously in the flight path and restricted from their previous designations to residential. And so as a result of those major changes, the model was implemented to determine what type of mitigations that the developers would be required to implement for the city during the horizon of the model. Right now, in the back of the report, it shows our current program, which is called the Lake Forest Transportation Mitigation Program. These are again, the improvements that are going to be constructed using developer monies to improve the traffic conditions at various locations in the city, as well as areas outside the city, because models don't recognize city boundaries. They look and see, so there are some improvements in Irvine as well as Laguna Hills. I am by no means any expert on traffic modeling. That's why we hire experts for that. Daryl here is our expert in that, and he has a presentation, which he has done before for various commissions, and we will ask him to go ahead and give that same presentation to you, and then, of course, he and staff will be available to answer any questions at the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Dave. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Daryl Zerfus. I'm a Principal Traffic Engineer with Stantec. And as mentioned, I'm here tonight to give provide some insight into the workings of the city's traffic forecasting model. The thoughts, many of the reports and studies that come your way rely very heavily on information that comes out of the model, such as the city's traffic fee program. So given some information and background on how the model works, what it can do, what its limitations are, hopefully it will be helpful for you as you evaluate these programs going forward. So with that, just in general terms, what is a traffic model and what does it do? You can think of it as it's a computerized process for systematically evaluating changes to the built environment and estimating the resulting effect that has on traffic volume. So the model takes inputs that are key inputs that the model uses is land use information, information about roadways. It takes that information and through a set of established computer parameters produces outputs consisting of traffic volumes, which we generally will aggregate as a daily traffic volume for a roadway, often called the ADT for the roadway. Very detailed peak hour forecasts for intersections.
Well, Mike, it's hard.
Yeah, having trouble hearing? I'll scoot a little closer and speak louder. Vehicle miles of travel, another measurement that is used for measuring traffic, also is produced by the model. So how does the model work with these different inputs? In regard to land use, the city is divided up into about 110 zones, and the model's database for each of these zones has a very detailed listing of land use. So for example, the number of single-family homes that are in a zone, the number of apartment units, square footage of office uses, square footage of City Hall for the zone that we're in right now. All of that is part of this database of land use. And it's also good to point out that the model extends well beyond just the limits of the city. The database covers essentially the entire county. For areas outside the city, the model utilizes data that comes from the Orange County Transportation Authorities, the OCTA regional traffic model. So it uses very detailed land use, specific land use information for Lake Forest itself, and then the OCTA's estimates for areas outside of the city. And then another important part of the traffic model is its representation of the highway network. And again, this is like another database, but this is more of a combination of map and database. And like the traffic zones, this goes well beyond the limits of the city. The roadway network covers the entire county. Every arterial roadway is coded and part of the database. For each roadway segment, there's attributes, key attributes like the number of lanes, the typical travel speeds, the capacities of the roadway, and that's part of the highway database that the model uses. So then, with all this information, how does the model go about doing what it does? These are called, in the technical terms, these are referred to usually as 4-step models, because there's 4 basic steps the model follows to produce traffic forecasts. First, it estimates the number of trips that are generated in every traffic zone. Then the model is step 2. It uses from that trip information, it estimates the distribution of the trips. Where do they begin and where do they end? Then step 3, for a typical model, we actually skip. That's the mode choice step. And for the mode choice refers to the method you use for making your trip, whether it's by car or by bus or taking the train. And with South Orange County, virtually all of the trips are done by automobile. So models like these, we skip the mode choice step and just go straight. We're working strictly with vehicle trips. Then the final step of a model is referred to as route choice. That's where the model uses the information about the beginning and end of every trip and calculates what the expected route or path that trip would take on the highway network to get from its beginning point to its ending point. So stepping back just a little bit about trip generation, that's the trip generation step. That's where the land use database comes into play. The model calculates the number of trips generated in each zone using what are generally standardized trip rates. The model also is quantifying those trips by the type of trip it is, its purpose. So it's separating out an estimate of the number of trips that are made from home to work, trips that are made from going from your home to a shopping center or from your home to school, because the different types of trips play a very important part in the distribution step. General examples of trip generation, residential uses generally generate anywhere from 7 to 10 trips a day per housing unit. Industrial use would be about 7 trips a day per every 1,000 square feet. An office use is about double that, about 13 trips per every 1,000 square feet. And then retail uses, they're the big generators on a square footage basis. That could be anywhere from 30 to 80 trips per 1,000 square feet, depending on the type of retail that it is. So again, the second step in the process, trip distribution, this is where the model takes the trip generation information by purpose, and it pairs up the trips. It pairs up the starting point with the ending point. So for example, in regard to a home to work trip, it'll pair up the home end of the trip in one zone with the work end of a trip in another zone. And it determines the spatial distribution of these trips based on factors that come from the regional traffic model, that are the statistical probability of how long a trip, the length of a trip, the distance of a trip, recognizing that your local trips, like for shopping or schools, are generally short, and your work trips or employment trips are generally longer. So it applies these statistics to separate and distribute these trips based on the typical distances that people travel to make that type of a trip. So then finally, the last step, trip assignment. That is where it takes all of the origins and destinations that it's calculated in the distribution step, and using the highway network, it calculates for each of these trips the specific route that vehicle would be expected to take. And that decision is primarily based on travel time. It looks for the fastest way to get from one zone to the destination zone, recognizing that people will generally choose the route that gets them there fastest. But it also takes into account congestion. As traffic volumes build up and congestion occurs, speeds go down. So the model does this in an iterative process where it assigns traffic, recalculates speeds, and does this incrementally. So if a particular roadway segment becomes congested and the speeds then become slower, it then finds other routes that could potentially be faster and assigns traffic that way. replicating what people do, will avoid congestion if there's a better way to go. So those are the basic steps of how the traffic model works. The question then is how do we know that the traffic model, that the data that we get from the traffic model is accurate or good? Before the model is ever used for forecasting traffic, it is tested through a calibration process. The first thing that's done with the model is a version is put together where the inputs match the existing condition. So the land uses match what's on the ground today. The roadway network matches what's built today. And then the output from the model is compared to the actual traffic counts that are measured. And if the model's estimate doesn't match a count, then adjustments are made to the various input values that we have in an iterative process until the model's output is reasonably close to what's actually measured on the ground. And then the model is considered calibrated and validated, and then it's used for what you really want it to use it for, which is to forecast traffic for some future condition. And that forecasting of traffic, then that's used for testing what-if scenarios, if there's changes proposed to land use. The different land use can be input into the model. Changes to roadways, the roadway network can be changed, or in many cases both are happening at the same time, and by doing that we can see what the model then estimates as being the resulting change in traffic based on a change to one of the input variables. And this here, this is my last slide. This is just a screenshot of some of the output that we get from the model. For every roadway segment, produces an estimate of the traffic volume, estimates of what the peak condition speeds are. It produces, as I mentioned earlier, the detailed turning movement volumes at all the major intersections, how many cars are going left, how many go through, how many go right. And this data is then can be used by the engineers or by the planners doing the study to prepare a traffic impact study or a corridor study or things like that. So that's essentially it. I know that's a lot of information to try to absorb in a short period of time, but any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Yeah, on our papers here is the LFTM intersection. There's 15 of them. So I know this has been around since 2011, if my memory serves me correctly, right? So in 7 years, we've got 5 of these 15 done, according to the memo.
I think that's about right where we're at currently, yes. Okay. The program lasts through 2030. Right. So, and as developer monies have arrived, staff and the council have prioritized projects and knocked a few off the list and are currently under design with a couple of additional ones, larger ones.
So there's like $6 million in the LFTM fund right now, I believe, plus another couple of million coming this year. So I guess my question is, how do we, number one, speed this up? And number two, some of these recommendations are kind of strange in my humble opinion. For example, number 12, Bacon Geronimo, it says, and that's Irvine project, not our project, add a second northbound left turn lane, so when you're coming up Bake and you want to make a left onto Geronimo, add a second left. But that intersection, that's, to me, is not the problem. The problem is the cars backing up on Geronimo into the residential, near the residential streets. But that's not part of this, and it's kind of strange. Another one is Lake Forest and Geronimo at an eastbound right turn lane on Lake Forest. But the problem is Geronimo near the school. But that's not addressed, and that's why I guess the fundamental, how did these results come to be? How did these recommendations come to be? Because they seem in these 2 examples, I could go into more, somewhat wrong. and how do we get moving on these things, and what can we do to help? And that's kind of my general questions.
Okay, we'll start with the list of projects. The list of projects is basically what happens is when the model is completed, and generally speaking with the base network, base roadway network on there, it will, in essence, red flag various intersections or roadway segments. In our case, it's really intersections that no longer are going to operate at a level at which we consider acceptable. And so then what happens is an engineer will look at that intersection and look at it and see, well, what's going to get us to that particular level of service that we're trying to achieve. Sometimes it can be done in numerous ways. You add a right turn lane here, or you could add a right turn lane in this direction. Sometimes it's only a movement or an improvement in one direction that's actually going to get you to where you want to go. And that has to do with opposing traffic and a lot of other factors out there. So in some ways, it's driven by the conditions and what will actually resolve the issue in terms of that level of service or the operating conditions, the intersections. Sometimes it's a choice, where it's an engineering judgment as to how you get there. Sometimes improvements they're good ideas, but they don't, in the model and how we calculate the conditions of the intersection, they don't resolve the underlying issue, which is getting that level of service to a certain point. So in terms of how we look at this, we are required by the ordinance to update this list and update the model at minimum, Doug, every 5-year increments.
Yeah.
That includes updating the program itself, and that's an opportunity for us as engineers to kind of stop and take a breath and take a look at what may be out there. And in some cases, the program allows us to substitute improvements, and so that's an opportunity for us to do that and look at that and see whether an alternative improvement might create the same equal impact or in terms of improvement, and perhaps be more appropriate based on the conditions at the time. Darrell's company is currently working on that current update for us, which will include a full review of the program and the projects. And so we certainly, in a relatively near future, will get some information from them. In essence, here's kind of where the program is, here's what the model's telling us. Are these improvements still making sense, yes or no? For some intersections, for instance, some of the ones that you mentioned, it's not beyond not beyond our scope to test different potential scenarios in terms of improvements to see whether or not alternative improvements can be put in place. The only caveat is it has to stay at that intersection, and it can't cost any more, otherwise the city's on the hook for it. So we've got some constraints in the system, but we also have flexibility to look at alternative improvements if we think they're worthwhile.
But if I may jump in too, I think maybe more specifically, this model was created in light of the proposed development. So this isn't a model to cure all. It was a model to cure, and correct me if I'm wrong, Darrell, what impacts that particular development would have on the system. So they're tied back to, so you might say, wow, there's a bigger problem here. That development didn't affect that problem, which was always there. This was a way for the city to get money from the developers to mitigate their impacts when the traffic model went in for their particular zone changes and things of that nature. So that might be part of the answer as to why this didn't get on there, but this one did, because opening up Alton affected, this street or this level more. So that might, I think, answers more of those questions specifically.
So fundamentally, the updates in process.
Correct.
Right? And some of the issues I raised, and I can raise more separately if you want, can be looked at as part of that update. Correct?
Yep. Correct.
And then the process of getting a project done is a CIP that goes to the City Council, a capital improvement project.
Correct.
And those are in the works, I assume.
Correct. And as we mentioned,
other memo
as often is the case with mitigation programs like this, because you tend to start out with a low amount of money, and some projects are simply just easier to build than others, you start with the low-hanging fruit, and then you start working into the more complex ones. And I'll give you an example. Right now we're in the design phase for the Bacon Trabuco improvements. That one's going to need to acquire an extensive amount of right-of-way. And if you don't always have cooperative owners, you can run into those issues. You have large utility conflicts that might be in place. So the further you get into these programs, you tend to get into the more complex projects, a lot more issues involved, and they unfortunately just take time to get you to that point.
So, can I ask a question? So, is it fair to assume that if, 'cause I know we've talked about a couple of intersections during the time that we've all been together. I know I mentioned Geronimo and Bake. Is it reasonable to assume that if we pick up the phone and say, hey, by the way, where are we relative to that particular intersection in terms of modeling or whatever, that there would be an answer? Maybe not.
You can always ask the question, and we will answer it to the best of our abilities in terms of what's going on. That one is a unique one. We can talk offline a little bit. There's actually 3 separate programs that are putting money towards that intersection, and we've actually worked with the other agencies to get them to do another improvement, the one we were just describing, the one off Geronimo onto Bake, as kind of a combined project. There was double funding of a very specific improvement. We said, it makes no sense. If we got a lot of money, let's make other improvements here. So that's just an example of how agencies have to work together. Can we make things happen that are outside of the scope of our mitigation program if we find other ways? And so staff is always working on that, and we recognize there's other improvements that would be helpful.
I understand. There's Irvine involved, and there's part of our deal. Okay. Another one is the right turn lane behind the mobile station at Lake Forest Drive and Tribuco. There is no dedicated right turn lane there. So if someone wanted to pick up the phone and ask, what are we looking at in terms of getting that accomplished? Could they get a timeline? Could they get some indication of where things stand relative to that as being an issue that's been brought up a few months ago?
Well, in 2 steps. If it is already part of a current capital improvement program, then absolutely you could get horizons and dates and things like that. If it is currently not part of a capital improvement program, it would need to be added as part of a capital improvement program, and we could discuss it with whoever, commission members, residents, how projects actually get onto the program. So that's, if it's in, yes, definite time frame. If not, we have to have a discussion about how to get it into a capital improvement program where it competes with other projects that are out there.
So the answer is yes, you can pick up the phone and ask.
You can always ask, and we will answer to the best of our abilities based on where that particular project that may be requested is in the works, whether it's already a part of a program, here's where we're at. It's not part of a program, here's how it gets to be part of the program.
Good. All right, thank you.
Any other commissioner questions on this subject? Okay, well, thank you very much. Very enlightening. Appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, we received another request to speak.
On
this item, yeah, number 6.
Okay.
Heiko Peschel.
Okay, now it's going to be fun. Heiko Peschel, Fort Perel Foothill Ranch. Mr. Vilwalk, evacuation plans. Having seen some of the plans and some of the accomplishments in this city for new residential areas, the area between Lake Forest and El Toro, where the new residential area was built on the hillside, has one entrance and one exit, and they are the same. If there's a really bad problem, that's a problem. The new area up in Portola Hills, I don't know how many exits there are to Saddleback Ranch Parkway, but Saddleback Ranch Parkway is the only exit that group of houses has, and that's a big bunch of houses. New one, the Nakasi Nursery. They are planning one exit onto Rancho and 2 exits onto Bake, nothing onto Lake Forest. Why not? There's a current entrance and exit to Lake Forest from the nursery. If they could improve that a little bit, they would have another way out of there. And that's a whole bunch of homes that can get into problem in a very low area. If we do have a lot of water, and today is only a beginning, that low area is going to go underwater fairly quickly because it's got high areas all around. So when you look at all these modeling plans for new developments, please take that into consideration. How do we get in and out? Thank you.
Thank you. So before this next subject, is this going to take quite a long time? I'm curious what the people in the audience are here for. Do
Is it possible to move their item forward and
That's
hold
what I
off
was
on the other
wondering, yeah.
presentation?
Commission's
We
prerogative.
have 2 speakers for item number 7 and 1 for 8 so far.
How long are we looking at this one, guys, do you think?
Probably about the same as we just went through with the previous one.
15 minutes? All right. You want to just stick with the, I'm sorry, I thought there was 10 people on one subject. That's why I wanted to move it forward. Let's just go. Item number 7, traffic.
We are almost 10 people here on one subject, and that's for the parking.
So what agenda item is that?
9.
It would,
9.
if the logical one would be
Parking
number 9.
permit policy, yeah. But there's only one speaker? 2 speakers?
There's 2 for number 7 and 1 for number 8, sir.
And no,
7 to 9. What I just heard. Wait, change 7 to 9.
Oh.
so there's 2 on number 9 and 1 on number 8, I guess. Okay, let's just go ahead with the traffic signal coordination and communication, and hopefully we can make it.
Mr. Chairman, yes, and audience members will try to make this fairly brief. Commission, you've already had an opportunity to read the report.
Yep.
So we'll be brief. This is really just an educational item about traffic signal operations, how traffic signals are our most commonly used device, how synchronization is something we're spending a lot of time and effort on. The city has done, since 2013, we've had a total of 9 projects, 8 of which are now complete, and we're currently working with OCTA on the 9th one, which is the synchronization of El Toro Road. We use currently time-based synchronization, and Tram can speak to that. It's basically, the signals don't really see groups of cars in the traditional sense. Everything is the clocks are synchronized, and so it creates kind of a time and distance diagram to gauge the arrival of vehicles. Going forward, the FHWA and OCTA are pushing us towards the next generation of signal control, which is called adaptive signal control, which does have the opportunity to redistribute green time in real time. So that's something we're building towards in terms of infrastructure, but we don't have any implementation of that in place. And then Tram here is going to just go a little bit and give you a very brief presentation on the communication side, which is an important aspect of any traffic signal management program, whether it's day-to-day issues at signals or synchronization programs, monitoring, and just keeping an eye on things and being able to make changes, and that's part of what he'll give us a brief description on. So in general, our goals are to minimize our issues with our individual signals through proper maintenance, have all of our signal equipment and cabinets meet or exceed our current standards for compatibility with future technology. That is a requirement as we get funding through OCTA to have them basically ready to go when we're starting to roll out new technologies. Having all of our signals connected to our master system so we can have communication and make these updates and address things in a very timely manner and get alerted when things are going wrong. And, of course, to continue to update our synchronization timing. OCTA and the grant programs allows us every 3 to 5 years to reapply for money, continue to improve things and to make adjustments based on the real-world conditions that are going forward. And, of course, our long-term goal is to evaluate our city's need for the possible adaptive signal control. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tram. He's going to go over just kind of what he deals with for us. Again, Hartzog and Crable is a consulting company that takes care of kind of all of these things within this item here. Helps things keep moving smoothly. They answer our requests for service in terms of where there are issues. And a lot of stuff happens in the background that we think makes traveling certainly better for everyone. We'll never claim it's perfect, but we certainly think it's better because we have people like these consulting companies on board with us. So with that, I will turn it over to Tram.
Yeah, good evening. Yeah, my name is Trammell Hartzog, but you can call me Tram. And what I'm going to demonstrate here is that presently the signal system is, the server is actually in Laguna Hills. And the signal server serves the cities of Laguna Hills, Lake Forest, Laguna Niguel, Aliso Viejo, and Laguna Woods. So basically, we're accessing, and the city has a workstation here that accesses that workstation server in Laguna Hills. And the other agencies, like Laguna Woods and Laguna Niguel, they do the same thing. So it's a joint project among the agencies, recognizing that the signals, obviously, these arterials are crossing interjurisdictional, so we're trying to keep the arterials flowing through there. So basically, what I'm looking at here, this on the right is the zone map. So this basically goes all the way up here in Lake Forest, all the way up in the north end up here on Bake, into Laguna Niguel, down on Moulton. And so we can go zoom into Lake Forest. So this is the El Toro at the 5. And so we're looking at the intersection here. This is real time of what's happening in the street right now. So this is the intersection of El Toro and where am I at? Bridger, get my eyes out here. It's a pretty fuzzy picture here. But and then so if we want to look at El Toro and Rockville, we just bring it in. So we can look at each intersection real time. The intersection, we can change the timing. We can update the databases remotely. The intersections are continually counting traffic. And so we're logging that traffic into the system so we can go in and see what our flow rate is so we can fine tune the system. So it's basically, it's a living thing out there. It's something you don't just turn on and walk away. It's an ongoing effort to keep the intersections running. So some of your issues that you brought up with the master plan routing, at Geronimo, you say you have an issue with the side street there. That's where we go in and recognizing some of these locations are heavy school locations, so you have real problems during those peak times, but we can set up special programs that will try to mitigate that traffic. And so the database, so this is pretty much where we go in.
Just say 5 years ago we didn't have any of this. So we've been able to connect all of our, virtually all of our traffic signals over the last 5 or 6 years to a central system where we can monitor it. Trams company monitors it on a daily basis. Before it was, we think there's a problem, county go out there, stand in the intersection for an hour or two and look at it and go into the box and tweak something, stand there, watch it, see if it works or not. So this has really been a tremendous asset to be able to access it real time, quickly, have some consultants come on board and really help us to monitor our traffic signal system.
So if somebody says this intersection was all fouled up on this particular day, you can go back and look at that time of day.
Record it?
Yeah, what it does, there is event logs in there. We're monitoring the detectors at all times. It has for how long a detector is occupied. For instance, you've all seen it, the left turn on, nobody there, and that's due to the detector is locking up. And it may be an intermittent thing. It's not doing it continuously. It's working, at 2 in the morning, it locks on for 10 minutes, it goes away. So we can go back on the history of that and see that, and then we call the maintenance people to go out and troubleshoot, well, why is it locking up? The loop that's in the pavement, a wire, it's a pretty hostile environment, and it may be as simple as just resplicing the loop at the pull box to a cable that goes to that loop, or the loop may be failing due to pavement failure. And so that's where we need to look at rehabbing the street to replace that loop. So detectors are critical. That's the main issue that we have, is keeping detectors working. So we know we can go back 6 months and look at the history of this. We can do what we call split monitor, where the coordination programs that are running, you can go back and look at the history of the intersection on how much split time is given to a movement, how much is actually used, or is it continually being what we call forced off or something where there's not enough green time. So that's where we can try to fine tune those split values. one issue that we do have is that capacity. You can only get so many cars. It's like it's a pie out there. You got that basically say 120-second cycle. You're dividing, you're saying you're giving your left turns each, say, up to 20 seconds. And your through phases maybe 30. But the demand coming in during that time, you may be trying to get more cars through than you can get. It just, if you're giving somebody green, you're giving somebody else a red, basically. And so that's where capacity comes in, where we have to add, we need additional lanes. The left turns are stacking out, and that's where the projects come in. Putting in a dual left, now we can move the same number of cars in half the time, roughly, when you have in there. So what we're trying to do is get that capacity down to where we're not over capacity. And so El Toro Road's a good example. We have intersections that we are over capacity at certain times. During that peak half-hour time, you're just trying to pump more cars through. They're coming in on all four approaches, and you just can't give them enough green time. If you try to give them the green they need, basically you're trying to put push 150 seconds worth of cars through a 120-second hole is what it is. So, and then the coordination is now the signals. When we do coordinate, each intersection is running on the same background cycle. And the reason for that is you can just picture if a car is leaving intersection A, when he arrives at intersection B, that green needs to be there every 120 seconds because he's leaving every 120 seconds. And so basically it's a compromise on an arterial where you have the critical intersections controlling that cycle length. So now you have a minor, relatively minor, that's running on that same cycle length. So now the excess green is going to go to the main street, and so that's where you get the complaints of the left turns and side streets during off-peak periods when you're trying to coordinate. So that's the main issue we're running into.
It's a balancing act, and
So
the goal of what we're doing is to try and squeeze everything we can out of the existing roadways, but as Tram pointed out, there are moments and times where ultimately, even with all of the, and I call it magic sometimes, that they can do for us, you still end up having to do capital improvements to improve roadways and add capacity.
So maybe one of you guys can answer the question everybody in this room has, and it's the same one I have every day, like today. What is causing the problem when you're driving down Alton Parkway in the middle of the day? It's not a lot of traffic. You come up to Monarch, going up the hill, and the light turns red, turns green for 15 cars, and then as soon as that light turns green and you're going up the hill towards Catalina, Catalina turns red. Why is that? Why wouldn't Catalina turn red if it's, quote, synchronized when the cars are about ready to get there?
Well, one thing is synchronization is not, it actually creates more issues during off-peaks. And that's what, in this arterial you're talking about, or roadway, is as soon as you run coordination, like I say, you're running on a background cycle, that cycle is not perfect for each intersection. Each intersection has its own natural cycle that it wants to run on. If you're just sitting there in its own little universe and nobody else around, it's going to, during certain times, it'll run maybe on an 80 or a 90, depending on demand. So when you coordinate that, we can coordinate that. But then the issue you have is side streets and left turns take the brunt of that, where now you're staying green on the main street when there may not be traffic. So actually coordination works best when you're not at capacity, when you're near capacity, when you have enough traffic. So, but
it's always that balance, and I always say, you know, all of us drivers, myself and anybody else who's in the business, we wear two hats. The one when we're on the main arterial, going in the direction we want to go, we don't want anything to stop us. We just want to see green after green after green. But seemingly the minute we enter that left turn lane to get off that arterial, all of a sudden we're like, come on, change. I don't want to wait any longer for that, in essence, that same group of cars I was just in, who's approaching me perhaps saying, hold it, I don't want to have to stop. So it's always a balance, and that's what we have with these guys. And they've got a lot of little things that they can do to try and help it, but when you're dealing with the real world and people that drive, everywhere from foot to the floor to, 20 miles an hour under the speed limit, all of those play a factor in that. And whenever we get issues raised by residents or others, we always try to do our best to review it, try to understand it, and address it if we can.
So, just my one final, so that system that you're using, do you go and look at that when there's a complaint, or is there somebody proactively looking at that daily or whatever, looking at the traffic flow and making adjustments?
Yeah, we have people that are looking at this by phone. We can access this through the laptop in the field, because it's all going through the internet to get to that. So when we do get a call, we have a number of people I have it at my desk. If I get the call, I can bring up an intersection and see what the issue is. We have a detector that's locked on, or it's not serving, a phase is being skipped.
But to answer your question, we do have someone, when there's a complaint that comes in, we look at every one of those complaints. And we either call a technician or the maintenance company if it's a maintenance issue or something like that. In a particular case of Alton that you just described, we do have constraints out there. There was an Alton Parkway traffic signal synchronization program through OCTA. It was about a $2 million program. OCTA paid 80% of those costs. The city paid 20%. We shared with the city of Irvine. Part of that is a condition that we maintain off-peak midday coordination and also weekend coordination, Saturday and Sunday. We have to do that for 2 years after the project has been concluded. The consultant that implemented the program is obligated every 30 days to drive that, record data, and make fine-tune adjustments to all that timing through there. But in the midday, like you said, if there's a side street call, that'll throw that coordination off to where you'll get a red and a red. We can't take that off yet until the 2-year period's up, or we lose that 80% funding. So there is an obligation on our behalf.
I think, too, what we don't have is a traffic management system or center. You see in the movies with the guys in the lab coats and they're big TVs, right? And they're running all the signals with cameras and stuff like that. That might be some place where we want to go. It's expensive, but at some point in time, perhaps. But where you have somebody with a camera that's looking and tweaking times in real time, again, I think the system certainly works well for what we've been able to accomplish in the last few years, and it works pretty well when you're overwhelmed with demand. You're overwhelmed with the demand. We don't have a stadium, outletting into one area where you want to have somebody on there really moving the traffic around. But that would be the next step in terms of evolution of active traffic management.
So in general, yes, it's monitored on a regular basis. However, the eyes and ears of the public are very important to us in this one. We see things, oddities. If we can't explain them, there might be an issue. And that's why we ask our consultants to go out and take a look at things like that. And sometimes we do what we can out there, and while trying to still preserve the progression, the coordination that we're required to do, and to try and serve the majority of the drivers out there. So it's a constant effort to keep ahead of this and try and address concerns that we see them while still trying to move the cars as efficiently as possible.
Commissioner, questions? Mark?
I do.
Sonny?
Okay, we have 91 signals in our city. How many of those have been adjusted, would you say, during the time that you've been involved with your server? I realize you have many, many more signals that you must... How many are there, by the way?
There's close to, with the other agencies involved, there's pushing 250.
How many?
250.
Overall, in the entire area.
That's the whole area of the other agencies that are changing.
That's
okay,
part
of that 250 in the last year, how many,
no.
How many have been adjusted?
I'd say 50%. They're looked at, the timing on there, basically, the coordination timing is the one that's looked at. The free, what we call free timing, the yellow times, walk times, ped clearance, those are generally fixed. They're based on speed and distance. To adjust the coordination time is the split time. The free time that would come into play is the max value. How long can a light be on if there's constant demand? generally, we don't have that issue during the off-peaks. So the coordination split values are the critical intervals that are.
So you said 50%, so I'm assuming that may mean that we have about 45 of ours that are adjusted within the last year or so?
Well, these corridor projects, as they come through, they're doing that on a monthly.
Yeah, that's a
they're driving
monthly.
through.
monthly
Part of
basis,
their
right.
duties is they make timing recommendations. They may want to change a left turn value, split value.
So there's data on lengthening the green lights, so to speak, or shortening them, or whatever,
Right,
based
taking-
upon
you're
flow.
trying to balance, like I
all
said, the
that.
capacity issue. You may have if side streets. The other issue too is pedestrian timing. The streets are so huge now. The PED requirement to cross the street is generally greater than what the vehicle demand requires on these minor streets. That you, like on Bake, you got, and that has been just updated in the last few years, where the pedestrian timing has been increased, mandated to be increased, and so that has hurt us quite a bit on. It's made our cycles longer.
Yeah, that was a 2014 requirement, and at that time, we had adjusted every signal in the city. Subsequent to that, in 2016, we went back and readjusted based on the yellow times and also, again, the PED timings. All of the corridors, there are, 8 of them right now. We're doing the 9th one, are looked at on a monthly basis. So there's quite a few signals that are looked at on a continuous basis. And then we have our favorite signals near schools that are constantly being adjusted because of the school programs and things they have their vacations and their events that are built in. We have the summer programs we run. We run some rephase programs near the schools where it comes up twice. There are just a lot of things we do around the schools to help move that traffic along. And those are done on a very, very frequently, sometimes weekly basis.
Any other questions from commissioners?
Okay.
Jordan?
When's the 2 years up on Alton?
Not soon enough.
It's
Got at least another year.
Stantec is a consultant on that, but that's not our consultant for that. I believe we've got probably another 8 months.
I would have guessed more. There's
it's
a
about
significant
8
amount of
months.
time.
It's getting close.
We're not down to the last few days.
Oh, yeah, we've got
half a year, somewhere between half a year and a year left to keep asking that consultant to continue to work on it. Even when they're gone, in terms of their contract associated with OCTA, the responsibility simply falls to the city's ongoing consultant. So we're always there and available to look into issues as they come up.
And do you guys review the reports monthly with the data that's provided?
Yes.
You do? Okay.
Yes, we do.
Okay, so not
We
the
get monthly
consultant
report.
that actually
Very
sees
similar to the
staff is-
report that's in the appendix.
Okay, thank you.
So, to wrap this up, the synchronization program has issues. It's not perfect. It doesn't work like people think it should work.
Correct.
So in this rather lengthy memo you gave us, you mentioned this adaptive signal control system, which sounds like what needs to be done. So how do we get one going? What do we need to do?
It's typically a lot of money. Tram could probably speak to. Do we have it anywhere in the county? I know there's some in the state.
Anaheim has tried it around the stadium, but it's been proven that adaptive works best during off-peak periods where you have available green time available. During congestion, during capacity issues, it is shown not to work. And so that's a lot of our issues, our capacity problems during the peak periods. So adaptive, and then it takes a lot of detection. That's where the money comes in. You have to have, let alone detectors at the location. We have detectors that are 300 feet back on the arterial. You have to have detectors now that are on the far side that are sending count information down to the next intersection. So it's quite
Yeah, because
involved.
current ones today, you pull up the light and you have the things in front of the light. That's your detection. That doesn't solve it. It's too late.
For the most part, there's some advanced detection, but generally,
it's a lot more proactive. So I think, I'm just suggesting that I think this next commission needs to have some information on what this program does, what it is, what are the pros, what are the cons, and it may want to make a recommendation to the city council to look at doing one.
I think that would be appropriate as part of the capital project.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, thank you for your report. Any other questions? Nope. Let's move on to item number 8, the results for the three-way stop warrant study for Saddleback Ranch Road and Ridgeline, which staff is recommending a three-way stop at this corner. Did you want to give a brief report? And
Very brief presentation.
Public comment?
Yes, I know we have someone that wants to speak on this item tonight. In July of this year, there was a fatal collision involving a pedestrian in a semi-truck at the intersection of Saddleback Ranch and Ridgeline. Following the collision, the city did a very initial assessment of it, of the overall traffic conditions, and the initial review did not identify anything specific at that time. However, the city did take steps to enhance truck restrictions in the area, and based on council direction, the city hired a traffic engineering consultant to review the intersection to determine if an all-way or a three-way stop would be considered appropriate. There are a series of justifications, we call them warrants, that traffic controls in general, especially the ones for controlling all movements, stops, traffic signals in particular, that come from national guidelines that the city uses, as well as every other agency in the state of California uses. So we start there when we do these types of studies. The report is there, it describes them, it discusses them, it involves things like a specific collision history or high volumes that make it difficult to turn off a side street. Those are the kinds of things that we start with when we do this kind of study. The consultants did complete that study of all of the basic warrants and found that in this case, none of those specific warrants were met or certain combinations of them were met. However, as is often the case when you're dealing with particularly traffic engineering, you have to use traffic engineering judgment as well, and it should always be included in any type of study from similar to this. From that judgment, the consultant concluded that the what we call the vertical curvature, or in this case the sight distance from someone making a turn off of Saddleback Ranch Road, was limited to the point that they felt it was appropriate to recommend the all-way stop. I do want to say that staff has looked at this in the past. Engineering judgment is a broad range of ways of looking at things. And so in the past, the staff has looked at this and using slightly different criteria felt that the conditions were acceptable based on the fact that most people turn there and some other factors in that. However, we asked the consultant in this case to be conservative in their thinking on the slightly farther range of the engineering judgment, and as a result, they have made the recommendation for you tonight. Staff does agree with this recommendation and considers it reasonable. And it is a combination of the parameters that they used, the sight distance limitations that cannot be corrected, vertical curvature cannot be corrected. Also, we have relatively equal volumes, or approach volumes, so by putting in an all-way stop, you're not stopping a lot of through traffic on Ridgeline there. So it's important to recognize some of those specific parameters that you have. In addition, of course, we have a school crosswalk there. Not heavily used, but it is used on a daily basis by a certain number of students out there. So the conservative approach, the limited sight distance, the traffic patterns that exist at that intersection, and the school crosswalk, staff feels that combination of factors make it a reasonable judgment to implement a three-way stop at this location. And staff is recommending that the commission agree with that recommendation and make that recommendation to the city council.
Okay, thank you, Dave. And do we have public comment on this?
Yes, sir. Heiko Peschel.
No, thank you, not this time. Let Mr. Cooper go ahead.
Okay. Steve Coover.
Howdy.
I live at Ridgeline and Saddleback Ranch Road in the condominiums. In our half of the build there's 225 condominiums. It's split into two sections where one of them have two small side streets onto Ridgeline. But the majority of our community, I think it's 130 some odd units, plus a townhome community of another few hundred. The only way in, the only way out is Canyon Country Road onto Ridgeline, which is a stone's throw from Saddleback Ranch Road. There's no need for any more stop signs at this intersection. I've been there, living there since 1999. I go through the intersection a minimum of 4 times a day. I walk my dog across the crosswalks and sometimes not using the crosswalks like a majority of the people on the island of Portola Hills do. The accident that happened a few months ago, as tragic as it was, had nothing to do with whether or not there was a stop sign on Ridgeline per se. The accident happened in the crosswalk parallel to Ridgeline crossing Saddleback Ranch Road. A jogger who may or may not have been paying attention for whatever reason couldn't hear an empty double hopper gravel truck, which is quite noisy, who ran a stop sign, hit her, and drug her down the ground. My neighbor stopped the truck and held him at bay until the police could arrive. I'm intimately familiar with the intersection. I'm intimately familiar with sight distances. There's no need for more stopping. It would be superior to instead implement the illuminated crossing reflectors in the crosswalk, which Larissa Clark spent 15 years trying to get done in her community. The obstruction of any traffic flow whatsoever, I can't condone. We had to evacuate during one of the several fires in our area. And before Saddleback Ranch Road was butchered with traffic calming, it took us 17 minutes to get down Saddleback Ranch Road to Glen Ranch Road. That's once we could get on it. It is the only way out for our community. So if you put stop signs on Ridgeline, 3 things will happen. The first thing is people who come barreling up Saddleback Ranch Road will just run the stop sign because now they think cross traffic is going to stop for them. The second thing that's going to happen is you create a lag when people want to turn on to Saddleback Ranch Road or go straight through on Ridgeline back down to El Toro or Santiago Canyon, depending which way they go. This backup of only 5 or 6 cars is going to block my driveway, Canyon Country, to get into my community. Whether I've already been through the Ridgeline intersection and trying to turn left into it or coming up the other side of Ridgeline to turn right into it. The traffic will back up. There's no doubt about that, and I don't want to see that in my community. What's my experience level with traffic? I've poured asphalt, cut slots, installed loops. I'm familiar with 3M Canoga, Rio, and my own company's loop detectors. I deal with traffic systems on a daily basis. I'm not your typical average person who gets emotional about, oh my gosh, we have to stop all the traffic we can so that people can walk across the crosswalk. As you mentioned before, disappeared, most of the trips in the city are by automobile. And when the pedestrian is in the crosswalk, illuminated reflectors on the ground would serve any need at any time of day to notify anybody who already can't see. And because the vertical curvature...
Time's kind of up.
Oh, sorry. With the vertical curvature, it's even easier to see people in the crosswalk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Rogers, was there consideration to lighting up that crosswalk? I know there are some in the city. There's one by Rancho Cañada School. Is that thought about?
It was not for this particular location simply because the concentration of students aren't there to kind of get us to what we consider to be a reasonable justification for that. We absolutely agree with the resident who just spoke that the collision that occurred did not occur on Ridgeline proper. It occurred, as we noted in the report, on Saddleback. The real issue ultimately is, of course, the vertical curvature, and that is the basis for the recommendation here tonight. And that vertical curvature is not addressed by even enhanced crosswalk mitigation or any of our other traditional items that we normally like to try and implement first, things like parking restrictions and other things like that that can often go a long way to address concerns with sight distance, intersection warning signs and things like that. Unfortunately, none of those are going to address the underlying concern that the consultant expressed in here and that staff is looking at as part of this recommendation, which is that vertical curvature.
Any questions from commissioners?
Yeah, I have a couple. The first question I have is, in 2015 when this intersection was reviewed, was that done by a consultant or by staff?
Staff.
Okay. And this time we hired a consultant. And is it normal for staff to direct a consultant in their approach to how to look at the data, or was that done by City Council or independently by staff?
That was part of the direction both from council and staff in terms of how to approach this particular intersection and the review.
Okay. And then my last one is, however, in the staff report, the residents raised other general traffic issues that they felt an all-way stop might address. Can you expand on what those general traffic issues might be?
Well, one of them, of course, is the crosswalk itself, in terms of trying to, the fact that you have what we call an uncontrolled crosswalk across that intersection was one of the primary concerns that they had, not only for school children, but as the resident mentioned, other residents just going to and from the park. Again, with that vertical curvature issue, had expressed concerns about that specific issue out there. So that's probably the primary one. There's always some secondary ones in there that aren't applicable in terms of what we're doing with a stop sign. We don't install stop signs as speed control devices because they really don't function well in that. You actually get higher speeds away from that when you're stopping a major throughput on a particular roadway. But sometimes we get those kinds of comments, but in this case the primary one would have been the concern about the crosswalk itself.
Any other questions?
I know 35 years ago a signal was added coming out of the Ralph's supermarket parking area, or our parking lot. And for some reason, people didn't pay attention, and they went through those lights, and accidents occurred just because there was just going down Lake Forest Drive or coming up Lake Forest Drive. You didn't expect that signal to be there because of it just wasn't there before. And so there was an adjustment period that took place.
With any new traffic control device, yes.
What kind of things would the city do to help folks that are coming up over that area that's down, where the rise is?
Mm-hmm.
What would they do to help them to get used to even a stop sign?
Certainly. Things that we have employed in the past are changeable message signs, warning people that something's happening up ahead. We can use temporary beacons on top of stop signs. They're relatively inexpensive now. If you've ever been on Live Oak Canyon at Santiago Canyon, or right there, we put one on there recently. Those are the kind of things that we can do to raise awareness. We can certainly let the information through whatever social media and stuff through the community, and obviously, again, anything we can do to raise awareness. But absolutely, you're absolutely correct. It is our responsibility whenever we make a relatively major change to traffic controls in any community, whether it's a traffic signal or in this case a stop sign, to make every reasonable effort to alert the community to that, because the last thing we want to have happen is implement something with the goal of improving traffic safety only to have something happen as a result of its initial installation.
Now, is that yellow light a permanent fixture on top of wherever it would be?
In this case, it would be a temporary installation. We would put red flashing beacons on top of the two new stop signs to give.
Got it.
Even the changeable message signs, things we tend to have less success with static signs. Mm-hmm. There's so many signs out there, so the best thing we can do is something that really catches the driver's eye. So changeable message signs, temporary use of those flashing beacons out there, those red flashing beacons on top of the stop signs would be the approach that staff would recommend.
So the red flashing beacon would be permanent or temporary?
I would consider it temporary. It's unusual to use it. Normally you use it as a tool when the stop sign and every other effort that you put out there somehow isn't getting the message to drivers. So we kind of like to hold that back as a next step in case we have issues. But to use them on a temporary basis just to raise that awareness for a short period of time is always a reasonable.
And then the gentleman that spoke was concerned that there's going to be cars backing up on Ridgeline, I believe, to not be able to get out of his unit. We looked at how many cars.
The traffic volumes are relatively light, and could that potentially happen if you had lot of pedestrians deciding to cross in one way or another, but of course, in some cases, the pedestrians, you'd have to stop anyway. So I would put it out there as it's always a possibility. I don't think it's probable and probably not on an ongoing and a regular basis.
Any other questions from staff or commissioners?
I just have a comment. So when this was placed on the agenda, I reached out to some of the social media channels, Facebook, to share that this was happening in their neighborhood. And I don't live in Portola Hills, and I wanted them to be aware that this was taking place, and I did solicit any of the public's opinions to feel free to email me. I did receive 8 emails. All were in support of the stop sign and staff's recommendation. In addition to the comments, overwhelming majority was in support of adding a stop sign. Very few actually listed the fact that there was that fatal accident, but for other reasons there. So I just wanted to share that that occurred, and that was the feedback that I received from the residents that live in that community.
And please recognize this is not, I could count on one hand the number of all-way stops that I've installed for, in semi-residential areas that we're describing here. So they don't come along very often. Staff does not recommend them very often. The last one I did was also as a result of curvature that we could not correct, and that is one of the rationales and one of the recommendations that we often use in these situations.
I'm going to support this because, just for the audience to know, that we just make recommendations to the City Council. They're the ones that ultimately approve these things, but I'm going to support this because I've driven that 4 times in the last 2 weeks at all times of the day, and it is really hard to see because of that curvature. It just, to me, seems very, very dangerous, although personally I hate stoplights and stop signs. All they do is create more congestion, but a motion would be in order on the staff's recommendation at this time.
We have one more speaker, sir.
Oh, we do?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Heiko Peschel.
No, he was done.
I think he said he was passing on that one. Yeah.
He left.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll move the staff recommendation.
We have Commissioner Morper move staff recommendation, seconded by... No, he moved it. I was just commenting. So we need a second. I'll second the motion. Any other discussion? Please vote.
Okay, the motion carries unanimously with Commissioner Pequeño absent.
Thank you. Okay, next up on our agenda, long time coming, is the review of residential parking management permit parking policy. Let's see, do you want to do a brief report?
I will do a brief report, Mr. Commissioner Chairman, members of the audience. At the September 27th meeting, the Traffic and Parking Commission did a review, or completed a review of the current residential parking management. We call it the permit parking policy for shorthand here. And spent a lot of time kind of going back and forth, a lot of issues and a lot of things that they felt could be improved or updated or added to the policy. So staff has taken that input and created a draft for the Commission to review again tonight. There are a total of 12 changes. Some are very minor, others are entire sections that have been added at the request and of the Commission Chairman. We actually provided a second document for you, which I absolutely agree is much easier to read, much easier to follow, so thank you for that suggestion. All the changes that are in here are highlighted in yellow with a number associated with it that corresponds to the number in the report. I won't read them all, but just for the audience's sake, we have a few in here. For instance, we're now creating or suggesting that the council create a variance process. Right now, you have to have 75% of the cars, 75% of the parking spaces on any given street occupied by vehicles that are outside the neighborhood. This variance process would allow that to drop down to 67, which would actually, doesn't sound like a lot, but would actually ultimately probably qualify quite a few more neighborhoods for the next step in the process. We've also, or the staff and the Commission are looking at adding a section on something that else had been a concern, which is residual overflow parking. When you have a permit parking area established. The potential exists. Now, it doesn't always happen, but the potential exists for vehicles to shift into another part of the neighborhood or across the street. If that is the case, then a much lower threshold and criteria has been established to kind of address that. It isn't as if it has to be seen as a brand new request. We think that is a very important process. Others involve general guidance on, which was discussed previously by one of the residents that spoke about how do you issue a third permit, since the system or the council currently has it limited to 2. What are some of the criteria that you could use to establish unusual circumstances to issue a third permit, and quite a few other things in here. One of the ones that the commission did not choose to change is to oh, excuse me, I'm getting lost here a little bit.
The vote.
Thank you. Yes, I'm sorry. The voting process was discussed at length, and I think the commission ultimately decided that for various reasons, and we won't go into great detail here tonight, but that they still are going to consider ballots that are unreturned as no votes. And again, there's a lot of reasons behind that were discussed in great detail at the last meeting. We can certainly go into that if the commission asks us to. So that's an example of something that was reviewed, discussed, and ultimately decided to be left alone. And then, of course, there's just a couple recommendations in here about that very specific issue related to Regency Park and how the commission is suggesting that kind of debt going forward, including a review of a potential parking lot as part of the capital improvement program. So with that, I'll turn over to the commission for any comments or questions or discussion.
Thank you. Do you have public comment?
Yes, sir. Anita Green or Greer, followed by Kathy Zhang.
With that being said, I was not aware of some of the things that you had brought up that were discussed, and I was going to just present what I have. My name is Anita Greer. I'm representing the majority of homeowners from Brookhaven, a street in Bennett Ranch. To refresh your memory, we are one of the 3 streets that of the 14 that did not meet the 67% support threshold. We were fortunate that to bypass a few of the steps in order to vote street by street. And I thank each and every one of you, and especially Dr. Gardner, for taking this action. Moving forward, we want parking permit on our street of Brookhaven. We cannot control the 6 homeowners on the street that failed to return their ballots. This after many notices sent to their homes to educate the homeowners, an attempted phone call, several knocks on their door which were unanswered, along with a ballot. To me, this speaks volumes. They don't care. We should not have to be affected by the lack of their interest. It's my opinion that the majority should win. 3 ballots on our street were returned with names that did not match the property records. I'd like to present to you today 15 verified signatures of homeowners from Brookhaven that are now more educated and are on board with the parking permits. So these. Tonight, let's make the right choice. Let the majority be heard. Please grandfather us in under the same format as the other streets in Bennett Ranch, and let's do this all before Dr. Gardner ends his term. We don't want to wait 24 months. Does anybody have questions about how the vote went on Brookhaven?
I think we got that.
Review the stats? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're going to discuss your request.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Kathy Zhang.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kathy Zhang. I live Brookhaven I've been living there for the past 10 years. I used to love my neighborhood. It was used to be safe, clean, and convenient. But ever since the parking issue, the overflooding of foreign vehicles, I call them foreign not because they are made by Toyota or something. It's because those vehicle owners, they do not live in our neighborhood or even in our city. And so they created three major issues. One is inconvenience. It's creating inconvenience for the homeowners who have guests. We cannot park on our street anymore. And sometimes when they park in front of my house, they actually block the entire curbside that I don't have any space to put my trash can out there. I have to put my trash cans at the end of my driveway, which in the morning I have to bypass those. And also some of the vehicle who park there, they live in Mission Viejo, and for some reason they have keys to the gates that access the Aliso Creek bike pass, and we don't have any idea how they got hold of those keys. It's not safe for the homeowners on that street to have people from other neighborhood to have access to our neighborhood so easily. And also there's a lot of incidents where people throw brownie into my backyard ever since the parking became out of control. I have a dog, and fortunately I caught the brownie before he got hold of it. And also there are bones, there are trashes everywhere from their food wrappers and drink bottles. And we, as homeowners who pay association fee, we have to end up cleaning those streets, which we shouldn't be doing. So we are asking for your support and understanding. We hope you understand our pain. I'm sure you are homeowners as well. And also because other streets have enough votes in September voting process, they are now permitted, parking. So they started to shuffle their inconvenience to our streets by parking their permitted vehicle on our streets. So because they're too lazy to print their daily parking permits, they will have their unpermitted vehicles on their driveway, but their permitted vehicles on ours. So we are like being attacked by both by the foreign vehicles and also our friendly neighbors. So we ask for your support and understanding to give us the chance to re-vote. And also I have a question regarding the count of the previous vote in September. I believe there were two ballots that were not received but considered no. Why did we make that choice? I don't know why. Because why don't we assume those votes were yes, or they were just neutral? If those two votes were considered neutral or not there, then we reached the 67% majority. So I really wanted to request your reconsideration on that as well. Well, thank you for hearing me out.
So, Mr. Rogers, so the first question is, where in this yellow marked up copy talks about revoting when there's impact from other streets? Other streets had approval, and those cars decide to park on the non-approval street, and then they're in. Where is that in here?
That would be under.
So we're all on the same page.
Under the new section, where it's called residual. I'll put it on just to hang on. 1, 2. Yes, it's basically the bottom of the last page before you flip the last page over. That whole section is brand new, and it is an attempt to address in some ways, exactly what the residents here are concerned about and what we have experienced as a city leading up to this, including some initial residual overflow that was in the Bennett Ranch neighborhood. And the policy did not speak to this particular situation. And so it is designed to recognize that may occur and to create a shorter, more easily obtainable set of criteria to give that anybody who's affected by that residual overflow parking the opportunity to move quickly into a new process there. I think when we talk about the 24 months, what we're proposing here and what staff is hoping that the council accepts in terms of amendments to the study, the 24 months really wouldn't apply, because you're really, that's what we're, when you look at the original policy, it's really talking about an entire community or street failing to meet the minimum. We just need some time. We've got other things we need to work on. Here you're really going to talk about if the concerns do materialize, as the residents have indicated, we could, I think, reasonably move relatively quickly into this residual overflow parking study to see whether or not this new reduced criteria is met, and then move forward on that process. So these 24-month periods that are mentioned in here are really in terms of doing the exact same study over again, but when you're talking about when is it appropriate to look at the residual overflow parking, the policy is in essence silent on it, but clearly the intent is for us to be able to look at that relatively quickly once a neighborhood is posted and permit parking is in place and enforced. So it wouldn't be unreasonable for the commission to perhaps either now or direct staff to come up with some language that would make that clearer in terms of a time frame between initiation of a kind of a large permit parking area and when you could look at when it would be an appropriate time perhaps to go back and have a quick look and see what the residual impacts might be.
So if this new policy was in place, if it was already in place, it's not, but if it was, so this request that we received from them, would that have constituted appropriate request for you to go look at this again?
We would have it, as we indicated here, in terms of just meeting some minimum petition threshold, the HOA putting it forward to us. We would consider that to be the residual request, and we could move forward on it as long as it met that minimum criteria for kind of having us to get started out there. Now, of course, we would want to wait until we can judge whether or not it's the case, and I think that's kind of where the crux would come in here is what is that time frame, what would be reasonable. On one hand, we want to see if the concerns do materialize, but we also, in support of the residents, we want to make sure that we don't want to move too quickly, because then we might not find what we're hoping to find, and then in which case now you are talking about an extensive delay.
So if it was a couple of months later and you found out that it was impacted to the rate that it was needed, would you have another vote of that street?
If the conditions and criteria were met, yes, as currently constituted in the revision here. Okay. So I think that's kind of where we would suggest that this policy revision go forward and how it might apply to the situation that we have currently. And it's just so you know, we've mailed the permits, we've started putting up the signs. I don't think they're all in yet. So and then there's 30 days of kind of warning to try and set the tone for the neighborhood. Then after that, the enforcement starts. And so there's a period of time in which what I'll call it some level of normalization is going to have to take place. And then that would be, in staff's opinion, the appropriate time to then go out and look and see whether or not the concerns that the residents have
roughly 90 days. Roughly 90 days.
In that general time frame, maybe it's slightly more than that, but it's not tomorrow, it's not 30 days. We're not going to get to a point where we think we're going to have what we would consider to be the static condition that we can go out and determine whether or not it would meet this residual criteria.
I think there's a couple of things about this that just, I go back to my original thought relative to someone being forced to vote no because truly they abstained. I still have an issue with that. The reality is if there are 10 people that could vote and only 9 choose to, then I think the percentage should be based upon the 9. Now, I realize we're not talking about 9, but the point is made, I hope, that if number 10 says, I can go either way, I don't care, but don't bug me, and I'm not sending back that ballot. then they effectively say, I forfeit my right to vote at all. It's called abstaining. It could even be considered apathy. And if that's the case, then why not let those who become the majority be the majority? And if it's the majority say no based upon 9, then that's the way it goes. If the majority say yes based upon 9 voting, then I say let them go for it. That's my point on that. Okay, the other thing is we have an unintended consequence here as a result of a previous action, and that is the overflow parking that takes place as a result of someone who got lucky with their 10, and they've got 18 cars that are way over, and so some of them are coming onto this street. Well, I think there ought to be something in here that allows for staff to administratively expedite a reconsideration of that particular street. I have no problem with that, and by golly, I'll bet you as soon as the people that didn't vote the first time start thinking about it, and maybe the folks here drummed up a little more business to get them to vote, the chances are probably pretty good that there's going to be a higher number of people voting in the first place, as I see it. And I don't see waiting around. It ought to be expedited based upon unintended consequences.
Well, certainly the residual overflow is an attempt to add an entire segment or section to this policy that was silent on before, and staff and was kind of hamstrung when it came to trying to address these concerns. So certainly the language in here is that, as I suggested earlier, perhaps there is a time frame that the commission would like to suggest that, you know, these residual reviews can be conducted as soon as, and pick a number. Like I said, realistically, by the time you realize you might have an issue and the council adopts the resolution and you put the signs and mail the permit, there's an extended period of time that takes place, and you have the warning and finally the enforcement and then normalization. So there's always going to be this 3 or 4 month lag where you get to a point where it's going to have an ability to kind of go, okay, this is what this street's going to look like today and probably every day going forward, and those are the conditions we want to assess. But as I noted here, currently it's silent on how soon you can do a review of the residuals. So perhaps there's a suggestion from the commission. You can either leave it up to staff, or you can suggest something in terms of giving us that tool.
They turned in a petition. I don't know what percent there is of the folks that live on that. What percent is it? 71%. There it is.
And that
71. So I would say 30 days from now ought to be plenty of time to send out the mail to the folks and say, hey, there's unintended consequences as our staff reason for reconsidering it.
Correct.
71% is the other reason, and therefore I say let's move forward and help these folks out.
The petition is one way to ask and request staff to do an initial review or a residual review. It can also come from the Homeowners Association. So that is a gauge. We want to make sure that whatever action we're taking is on behalf of the majority of the residents. So
within 30 days?
That is already within the purview of the program here in terms of that. I would respectfully argue that 30 days you're not going to see the normalized conditions out there, because you're still going to be in the warning period associated with the signs going up. So I don't, again, it's the policy is silent on how quickly you can consider residual overflow parking, but I think there's just the realities of how these things get implemented, how long it's going to take in terms of normalized conditions. Because we want to see what they believe they're going to see. We don't operate under the, well, we think it might happen, therefore we're going to restrict parking on a public street, take away everyone else's right to use it, without some evidence to that effect. And the city attorneys have made it very clear to us that we need real evidence, and not, even though we may believe it to be true and our prediction efforts might be as good as anybody, until you actually have the impact, that's the criteria, and that's the rationale how a city can move forward under the vehicle code and under law. Acting on a belief without the evidence puts you in a position where you could potentially be challenged on
I
your
think
actions.
there's two separate issues here. I think the one he's bringing up is you have 71% of the people asking for a revote. A revote. That's fundamentally what it is. And you're talking about another situation where we have a request from people, say 50% or 60%, to go look at it to see if there is an impact from the permits in other streets. To me, it's two separate issues. So
you are now. Let me start with this. The petition that we often get is a direct request for a vote on permit parking.
Right.
However, we put that request through the process that the City Council has adopted, of which you are looking at tonight. So how it comes into us and the wording of those requests is often a request to simply install permit parking or something to that effect. However, we take that request and move it through the processes that the council has already adopted.
But what I'm just suggesting is that in this new policy, there should be two methodologies. Number one, if more than 67%, I'll put it that way, more than 67% of the residents sign a petition asking for a revote, then they should have a revote on that street. Period. If that petition is 50% or 45%, to go look at it again to see if there's an impact from the other streets, cars parking on there, that's a different situation. I think there's two separate conditions here, and I think that's what these folks are asking for is, look, we got petitions signed by 71%. Well, unfortunately, the other 29 didn't get to voice their opinion, theoretically.
Petition?
So why wouldn't we just say, okay, if more than 67% of the people turn in a petition saying they want a revote, why wouldn't we just have a revote on that street?
Again, I think there are some concerns about whether or not an actual impact exists. I think you do run the risk of having that.
But we already gauged that there was an impact from the original, when the City Council decided that Bennett Ranch was going to have permit parking in that whole residential area, that condition already was decided existed.
The council chose to override that request, or override that requirement as part of that, and that is council's prerogative and council prerogative only to override, in essence, their own policy that they've established. It's not an attempt by anyone to delay a revote. I will tell you, in my 30-plus years of experience, I have had situations where a petition representing a vast majority of a community it arrives at our office or our desk, and later opinions change, and so I'm not always confident that the vote will always equate to a petition.
Well, that could be, but it
so
just allows them to vote.
Let me jump in there. You're right. I believe where we've got two different issues floating on here. So the item before here tonight is to develop a policy, right? So we can include this situation in the policy, but I don't think before us is, should we allow a revote? That was already voted by council. It's already been voted by the community. That vote has passed. So I think that's off topic from a policy. So if you wanted to establish a policy that said, we believe anybody should be able to revote whenever you get a petition, that would be how you would address that. Mm-hmm. I think staff's point would be starting fresh, right? In this particular case, it's the residual overflow parking. So we implement something, then that voted no, we don't want this. We implement it next to it, right? The traffic then flows over. Okay, gosh, yeah, unintended consequences. You guys didn't want it before. We get it. You were hoping you wouldn't be affected. You're affected. There should be some proof that Yeah, and in fact, you were affected. This particular criteria that we suggest is less onerous in terms of proofing than the original intent is, right? And then moving forward from that is now we have the vote. So I think the process is similar in that, and we play with what the policy is, or look at that respect. I think we're getting a little backwards because of the nature of how this was approved before we had the votes and before we had the evidence. Was a unique situation before us. So I'd concentrate perhaps on the policy of when do you want to come back. I would suggest 30 days after enforcement has gone on, then that's when you would have actual residual overflow parking. To vote on residual overflow parking before you've even started enforcement doesn't seem like there's any impact. And then you'd go back to a policy of we should just allow a revote. And then how often do you revote? If we're making signs to put them up there, should we wait for somebody else to revote? And then there's another revote. It puts staff in a weird situation of when is a decision a decision.
Any other comments? Jordan, do you guys? Mark?
Yeah, I think that I don't like when it goes silent in policies. I think that people have brought up issues that I'm going to talk about in a second when we get on to the next subject in this policy, but about the third vehicle. I like definition and I like clarity. I think that provides a process that's easy for everybody to understand. So I would like to see some language in there. I'd like the 3-month mark not to be allowed prior to 3 months to give staff time to implement, but also to give you guys a timeline so that residents aren't waiting for the process to go forward. So I think 3 months is a generous time to order signs, to implement the process that's been voted on, to move forward and to start enforcement. And I think that they should be allowed to look at a revote or a residual, however we want to call it here, possibly every 6 months. I think that they're going to be impacted sooner than later, and I think that we need to put the residents first, and that we need to make sure that they have that ability to speak up if they did make a bad decision or people didn't follow through with a vote for what it is. That I agree that there needs to be time to look at it to prove that there is something there, but I think there should be a timeline on it, and that would just be my suggestion.
Mark?
I echo the comments about the 30 days. I'm sorry, the 90 days, 3 months. Typically, the permits will be distributed first.
Correct.
Correct. Signage to follow. So, I mean, what if we said 30 days after the sign goes in, just for whatever flukish reason that signs are delayed or something? I don't even know why, but let's just say 30 days post signs. That's the window for the normalization. If that seems reasonable to what you folks. So if you got it done sooner, then we didn't have to wait the full 90 days. We're going, you've got the permits, you got the 30 days post of.
The only thing with the 30 days, if I may, sorry
Please.
to interrupt. Typically the Sheriff's Department will just give warnings for the first 30 days after the signs go up.
Mm-hmm.
And so enforcement hasn't started. So I don't know if that's normalization or not. People are scrambling, trying to get their habits done. Maybe it's 30 days after enforcement begins.
Okay.
Maybe it's I'm just suggesting
60 days after the signs go up?
I think that would give 30 days to normalize it. To get the warnings and get the kinks out, 30 days of getting tickets, and then it should be normal by then.
Right, and I'm leaving open that signs may show up sooner.
Right.
Right, we don't have to wait longer. They may come in sooner, the permits can be sooner, the signs can go in sooner.
Correct. Sometimes it'll depend on the, Bennett Ranch was huge. We had almost 200 something. So it was a much, typically the permits can go out quicker, the signs can go up quicker, and therefore that period that you're describing, tying it to the installation of the signs, is a shorter period overall.
Because it's implementation of the program when the signs go up. That's really what it is.
And that's what I'm using
that
trigger.
makes sense.
That's what I'm using
trigger.
as a trigger, so we don't have to wait longer just for some artificial reason. So that would be my.
So what would be the wording that would change based on your?
I'd like to think staff understands the thrust of where we're going here.
I think so. Generally speaking,
60 days
many times the commissions or councils will allow staff to come up with language as appropriate. I don't know, Tom, do you often pass it by the chair in some way, or do you?
Well, let's continue and see if there's any more changes. If it's minor, we can add a 60-day trigger in here. If you trust us to do that, we can send it to you out via mail, and then we can move forward with it on the council agenda and get that moving. If it's a lot of changes, we might need to bring that back to the commission again. It's really your.
That won't be till January. That's the problem.
Again, that would be your direct pleasure. But you could
I don't think
amend
any of
it
us
as-
here want that to wait. It needs to go to the council.
So we certainly can add 60 days notice. I think that would be fine, and I'd continue and take any more of your comments, and we'd be glad to bring this on to the council.
So the other comment I had anyway was the number of permits. So people can get, under the revised policy, they can get 3 permits, and it appears, gotta find it here, it's a lot of words, that based on if the people have lots of cars, they can get 3 permits.
You can get the 3rd permit. Everybody gets
a 3rd permit.
Correct.
Right.
And
let's see where it says that. Where does it say that? Yeah, the number of. Okay, here we go. If the driveway's too short to allow vehicles to park there, parking needs disabled, the number of registered vehicles exceeds the available off-street parking by 3 or more. And an off-street parking is fully. So if a home has 8 cars, and they can put 2 in the driveway, and they get 3 permits?
no, you would have to show the criteria that we've used. Now, recognize the original idea from council was 2 permits, everybody gets 2 permits. And then in their deliberations, they came up with, well, let's at least have an opportunity for someone to come up with some sort of criteria or some reasoning that would be reasonable, that would be considered reasonable for, at the most, a 3rd permit. And so that basic generic language is what staff was operating on, and we had not had any requests until the Bennett Ranch and the Sky Stella neighborhoods kind of came all at once. And so you're talking about hundreds of homes that are included in that. So you can imagine out of hundreds of homes, you're probably going to get a handful of people asking for some sort of consideration for the 3rd permit. So in those requests, and this is being handled at staff level, we obviously have, like I say, some of the things that are obvious. You know, your driveway's too short, you can't park, and or a disabled individual needs it for reasons that we would agree with. We started moving through this particular request, and we said, okay, so where does this leave us in this world? And the goal of the council was full utilization of on-site parking. That was the reason they wanted to limit it. The previous program, you literally got 1 permit for every registered vehicle. So use these streets, these 2 homes as an example. One would have gotten 9 and one would have gotten 8. So that's what they were trying to address, is a situation where then people would turn their garages into playgrounds or workshops or small businesses or whatever it was. They wanted to use the on-site parking. And so this is kind of how we arrived at this spot. So taking the council's comments and how they arrived at where they did, and the goal of maximum utilization of on-site parking, proof of, staff came to the conclusion that these types of requests that met that criteria was unusual and met the criteria for issuance of the 3rd permit. So that's kind of where we're at. We have had, since this, we have had, as I noted in the report, we've had other requests. I will call them more kind of traditional requests. Well, I've got stuff in my garage and I can't use it, so I want more permits. The answer to that was no, because you are not fully utilizing your on-site parking. So again, this is an ongoing process, a little bit of a balancing act that staff is going to have to use judgment on, and we can't. I can't imagine trying to sit down and come up with every possible criteria, and even then, we would probably miss a handful of them. So it is ultimately going to be a judgment call on the part of staff. I get to make the initial call. If the resident, obviously in this case we would suspect a resident who is denied, can appeal that under the current policy, appeal it to the Director of Public Works, who has the final say in that matter. So that's kind of where we're at now, and that was the rationale and thinking behind granting the 2 requests that we did, is because they were able to document not only by photographic evidence that they're using their garage to its fullest capacity, but that they also have all, well, equal to or exceeding that number that we're identifying in terms of actual registered vehicles at that property.
So the max, under this new policy, the maximum permits is 3?
Correct.
Period.
Period.
Even if you have 10 cars, 9 cars, 4 cars.
Right.
Max is 3.
Max is 3.
Mr. Chair. Just a couple questions. The vehicles, we check to make sure they're registered at that address, correct?
Correct.
Does it define if a P&O is appropriate?
Enlighten me.
Okay, a P&O would be that it's not operable, that they pay about $15 to have that vehicle registered at a location to keep it current. However, it's not allowed to be driven on the street. So if a car has a P&O, they pay a much less registration fee, and they can leave it on a public street, which is fine. They just aren't able to drive it.
We have not gone to that level.
Okay. I think that photo evidence that a vehicle can be pulled in there where cars might not be operational, or that they're put there for a second and then removed. I personally don't like a third permit at all. I don't like the judgment call. I do see the need. Let me back up here. I don't like 3 permits. However, there are certain criteria that I think need to be strictly defined, and one of those has to be for the disabled individuals. I think that that is extremely important and should be there. I think also for homes that don't have or have short driveways that couldn't be used, that's another one. Those 2 are concrete examples that I think make sense. I don't know if there's any homes in Lake Forest that were built in a time where maybe garages weren't built. There's some in the city that I work for. We've had this issue come up before, so that you can't really restrict the parking permits if they don't have a garage to park in as well. So I don't know if that exists in the city or not. Can you maybe explain this? I'm not able to wrap my brain around this last bullet point. The number of registered vehicles exceeds the available off-street parking by 3 or more, and the off-street parking is fully utilized and documented by inspection and other evidence.
If you have, and we'll use a 2-car garage and a 2-car driveway. So if you have 7 vehicles total registered to that property, and you are using all 4 on site, therefore, I want to call it, the need is 3, so you get that 3rd. Under the current way we're administering the program as of this moment. If you have 8 cars, you get 1 extra. If you have 9 cars, you get 1 extra. So we're not, like I said, under the old program, you literally would have been handed 9 and 8 permits and can take all the parking. So again, it's an attempt to balance that need and recognize too that when people voted or voted on these, they voted with the idea that a 3rd permit could be issued or potentially issued. So it's I don't know how we're not in a position to.
I do see the confusion between the letters seen them here, and I'm sure you might kind of agree, maybe not. But the first one that says to vote for Sky Drive, it talks about limiting it to 2, right? It only talks about 2. It never says 3. And then the one when it went through, I believe, is when it calls out that a 3rd could be issued. So when the vote is solicited or the notification that a vote will take place, there's no option of a 3rd being there. 2 permits would be issued per property, are limited to 2 because each dwelling unit should have existing off-street parking. There's no discussion about a 3rd. And then once they receive that they're going to be getting permits, then the letter calls out that a 3rd is possibly available. So I have problems with that. I don't think that's clear, and I think I can see the frustration that Ms. Whelan has expressed in the email.
Well, we could certainly, I mean, obviously that's a
clarified
recommendation,
as it goes
and
forward.
yeah, any future votes would have that additional language.
So, Commissioners, we've been through this a lot the last 3 meetings. So, motion would probably be in order to approve the recommended revisions with the additional wording about within 60 days on the restudy. I guess that's the right word.
I have one more revision, I'm sorry. One more really quick one. It's on the first paragraph regarding how often they could be reevaluated every 24 months. I still, like I mentioned the first time, I know Chair Riker wasn't here, and we did lower the percentage in this new one to 67%. I still feel that if it's within 5%, I feel like there should be some verbiage that if it's within 5% of the 67%, that it could trigger a reevaluation every 12 months as opposed to every 2 years. I think there needs to be a tier in that.
So, if the vote was 62% or 60% yes instead of 67, you want another vote within 12 months? Is that what you're...
I don't think I meant vote. I meant evaluated.
Reevaluation.
Reevaluate.
So if it was 62% that wanted it, that it was just 5% less than the 67% required, that then they don't have to wait 2 years to have it reevaluated, that it could be done within another year.
So if the vote was within 5 points, or 62%,
Right.
or
Well,
more, 62 to 66.
As currently structured, 75% impact, let's move forward. 67 to 75, you can have a conversation with the commission to see whether or not they think it's appropriate to move forward with that initial one. If it's 60, well, anything less than 67, but at least 62, it's, okay, I'm sorry this time, but we won't make you wait 2 years. We'll only, 12 months we can come back because it was kind of close and a fair impact, probably worth allowing another look at that within 12 months. I get where he's going.
Everybody okay with that?
Okay.
Okay.
If I could, I want to be clear on the 75%, though, because I think that was the number. 67, when you got from 67 to 75, we're into the unique situations, the variance mode. So I don't want somebody to walk away saying 67 is the new number, because that's sort of a special consideration goes on between 67 and 75. 75 and above, you're good. 67 to 75, there's some gray there, and I think the commission might look for staff to say there are some extenuating circumstances that suggest 67 is appropriate, and here's what they are. But I wouldn't want somebody to walk away from tonight saying, oh, 67 is the new number.
No, I think
That's
he was
the target.
referring to the percent voting yes on it.
No, actually, Commissioner Teddemer is correct in his, and I understand what you're saying. If they walk away at 63, you still have, realistically, you still have to hit 75. It only gets to 67 through another process, and I see what you're saying in terms
I just want to make sure that because the way it's written, I would prefer that it be 75 is the standard. Staff will consider special circumstances between 67 and 75, but there needs to be certain criteria. The variance idea needs to be in play at that point.
Maybe it makes sense to remove that sentence from the beginning of the policy to, later in the policy after that variance is discussed, or we can just leave it if it's, I don't want to delay it anymore. I was just trying.
Nor I just want to make sure it's clear that people understand that they don't want
Completely.
67, yeah, okay.
So you're clear on the clarification that's needed, right, staff?
Correct.
So I will move the item with the recommended changes regarding, let's see if I can do this, regarding the reconsideration if it's within the 5 points, as I recall. Was that the agreed to number, right?
That one item, correct.
Can I just want to make sure I understand it.
Please do.
First,
yes.
The 67% down to 62% is regarding the vote or the frontage?
That's the impact criteria.
That's correct. Is that
Yes. I'm
Okay,
not-
that's what I
I'm
want
not
to hear
talking about
from.
Yeah, I'm talking
you,
about
Jordan.
the
Make
value.
sure.
Yes.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
My motion is made by Commissioner Tittimer. Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second.
Second by Commissioner Morper.
I think that there was the other thing we talked about too, which was the residual.
60-day
That
thing.
would be 60 days from the installation of signage, which is the enforcement and normalization period.
Correct.
And I'd also like to add language about the P&O, that they're not registered if they're not available to be on the streets. That I think that needs to be clear too.
That those vehicles don't get
They
permits.
would not count in that criteria.
Correct. That I think it needs to go down to that level because I think a lot of people do have P&Os, and I don't think that's fair to give it as an issuance for a third permit because of a P&O.
Makes sense to me.
And just so I'm clear, this motion is to make these changes, and we are entrusting staff to make them and go straight to council.
That
It's
is
not
correct.
coming back here. Everyone is.
Correct. We will pass some language past the commission to make sure that you're comfortable
So
with it.
if this goes to the council, please, because, we've been talking about this for 3 months.
Correct.
If they get 15 pieces of paper with all, it's got to be real clear, maybe with a table, here's what it said before, here's what it says now, so
We'll make
they don't
every
have
effort
a
to make
3-hour discussion like
make
we're
it
gonna have.
as clear as possible to them. However, they do put a lot of faith in you.
I know. Okay, please vote. We have a motion made and seconded. Please vote.
The motion carries unanimously with Commissioner Pequeño absent.
Thank you, sir. Next item on the agenda is Kavanaugh Road street sweeping.
This is
Item number 10.
This is your 1-minute presentation. Kavanaugh met the criteria established by the city. Staff is recommending approval of the parking restrictions, or recommending the Traffic and Parking Commission recommend that the council adopt a resolution to establish the restrictions.
I'm sorry, can I just interrupt for a moment, for the members of the public that are here regarding this, assuming this goes through as a new permit, I think we would accept your petition to go look at it, so you don't have to do any more work.
Correct. Good. Excellent
Assuming
point.
this all goes through, we have received your petition. Assuming this goes through with council,
council
signs
is-
already up, so this would start that process. So
It
you
is.
guys don't have to do any more work, assuming the process goes through.
In essence, as soon as council...
Thank you for being here.
As soon as council would adopt these revisions, we would then literally go out...
We've got to...
In essence, the next day,
got
to
a
go out
request.
and look at it. Yeah.
Correct. Correct. Possibly this week.
It would potentially start at the end of this week,
When the signs go up and it starts implementing.
when the last sign goes up out there.
Right. When the police start to enforce it. So this has to be adopted first by the city council. So track your council things. You'll be invited to come to a council meeting.
Hopefully you'll have a Happy New Year present.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
So we have
Sorry
a
for that.
staff recommendation for Kavanaugh Road street sweeping restrictions. Any questions from the commissioners? Mr. Commissioner Morper moved staff's recommendation, seconded by
I'll second.
Commissioner Vilwalk. Any other discussion? Hearing none, please vote.
Mr. Morper.
Anybody not vote?
Commissioner Morper, you need to vote. Okay, that motion carries unanimously with Commissioner Pequeño absent.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is annual reporting, which of the commission, which you have a memo here, which is quite clear. I think the question is this emergency committee or any other things you want to add to this report.
Correct. Yeah, basically it would be a presentation on the items noted here. That's kind of typical. And the real question, as the chairman noted, is are there any other items that the chairperson or whoever is giving the presentation at that time you would like to present to council for, in this case, direction?
So I would like to see added is some of the requests you've received for capital improvements, like the right turn lane on Lake Forest at the mobile station and the left turn lane at the porthole into the 248. They don't have to be, we're going to do these things. They were items under consideration and review by staff.
Certainly those would be, and I'll just give you in general, normally we would take any commission recommendations and add them to your global item to go over capital projects, and then the entire capital projects list would go to the council for whatever recommendation and priority you have. However, I don't think it hurts to include it as part of this presentation, also that you are asking council to allow the commission to consider and provide input on the capital improvement program, and here are some of the ones that we think we would like to consider in that.
That we're reviewing.
Yes.
Yeah, because we haven't voted on whether to do those or not yet.
Okay, could I just add one thing here? In terms of a discussion I had before the meeting with Dave relative to requests by an HOA to what's the term I want to use? Waive or temporarily stop the permit process due to an extenuating circumstance or scheduling of resurfacing or whatever. It's something that is just routinely handled administratively. It's nothing that we have to insert in policy.
Correct.
And I used the specific example of our homeowners association that had an issue among members who had some resurfacing of their streets being done. And at the time they were notified of that, they had to park elsewhere. And when they chose to park elsewhere, they went over into a permit area, which is behind La Madera. And when they parked there late at night or whenever, they didn't notice the permit signs. And of course, they didn't have permit parking on their side of the woods. And so when the officer comes by and tickets them, they were surprised. And as a result, they couldn't get that ticket waived or pulled or whatever the process should reasonably have been. And so the association was approached with, can you help us out? And so we said, yeah, we'll reimburse you the cost of your ticket this time on a dispensation basis. And so we solved the problem as far as our members are concerned. But now in talking with Dave, when the association, such as ours, resurfaces streets, then all we have to do is pick up the phone and say, hey, cover up those permit signs, and you'll make contact with the sheriff's department and say, hey, don't enforce it.
You would put forth a request for that, and we would evaluate that request and make a determination on it at staff level. The answer isn't always yes. I'll just give you a very brief example. Sometimes you have communities that front major arterials, and they want to flood their cars out onto a major arterial, and we don't think parking on a major arterial and opening your door into a 50-mile-an-hour travel lane next to you is a good idea. So the request comes, please. The answer is no. So at administrative and staff level, we can accept the request, review the request, and if it's appropriate from a traffic safety standpoint, we can grant it. But it's all at staff level. We do not need, for instance, the council to, as part of this report going to council, to in turn grant staff that authority to do something like that.
Okay, but you heard the example that I used, and I wasn't talking about arterials because those aren't HOA roads.
Correct.
Okay.
There's a nuance in your request. You and I can talk about it offline, but it's, overriding permit parking in an adjacent neighborhood for the people across the street. But the answer is we handle those things administratively.
All right, just a couple comments on the evacuation plan that I kind of threw out there a little bit too early. So this came up, again, not only is it my profession, but it came up with the Saddleback Ranch Road stop sign. That discussion started from members of the community that they were concerned that adding a stop sign in an area that only had one egress route, that could possibly delay in the evacuations that they saw in the 2007 fires, et cetera, et cetera. While I don't necessarily or at all agree with that statement that stop signs typically aren't part of evacuations, and that's my professional opinion, but that's how it came up. That it's something that I wanted to bring forward already as it was placed on the agenda, but I just think it's important that we need to start be proactive, and sometimes in local governments we are reactive. And I think that this needs to be addressed at some level, whether it's through, I still would like to add this in here to make that ad hoc committee that could move this forward and to meet and collaborate with staff to develop a good plan. There's already good plans out there that I've shared that I think can be used as templates to develop this plan, and that it could be a really good process for everybody involved to go through it, because the worst time is when you get that vegetation fire that's ripping through like happened in Paradise and you don't have anything. And in the new designs of City Hall, you guys are going to have an awesome EOC. I'd like us to have some plans to go along with that, so that when, such as yourself, Mr. Wheeler goes in there and you're in these roles and in these chief positions making decisions, that there's a document to reference. And I think that that's part of what I was doing. And, an individual made a comment about development, and I wanted to make it clear to everybody that this is not a political development decision, that I want to move forward with evacuation routes, not to try to highlight development, not to try to say if it's good or if it's bad or if there's too many homes or not. Whatever we have or whatever we put into place, whether people are challenging if there's enough ingress and egress for the areas that we're developing, is not what I'm trying to bring to light. I'm trying to bring to light that whatever's there, we need to have a plan to get people out, whether it's the most effective or efficient way because of political reasons or because of what people want to agree on, that there just needs to be something established so that we have a good process to let people know when there's a disaster, that the flow of traffic is optimized, that we can use zones to evacuate individuals certain different ways than others, kind of like how the synchronization works, that it's very much a traffic issue, especially in areas that have traffic challenges. So that was my hope, is not just to wait and start this. And as we all know, as I work in government, some of us up here do too, it takes a while. And I'm just trying to hit that T down the road a little bit. Let's have some good discussion. I'm doing this pretty much volunteer. I'd love to see my community protective. I have two beautiful girls and a wife at home. Live in the very high fire severity zone, which probably wasn't smart because of my profession, but I love where I live, and all I want is just to have some understanding that staff knows how to do that correctly, and I think it would be a great process for everybody and not meant to be a hindrance.
So maybe you can solve this problem by just adding one more line to this November. Recommend the City Council establish an ad hoc committee of staff members to prepare an emergency, whatever the right word you want to use. It's your expertise, not mine, but an emergency plan.
Right. So far we're going to list capital projects that you have all submitted as something you'd like the council to, in essence, allow you to consider as part of that item. And this would be an ad hoc committee, form an ad hoc committee, a combination of staff and council to develop these emergency evacuation plans. I am by no means any expert in it. I don't know how that might go. It might still be very interesting for the commission just to hear what the current processes are, and perhaps we talk about. I think even if the council agrees to this, that's in January. To get an opportunity for the professionals that run this program for the city currently to give us all some enlightenment as to what currently exists out there. It creates the baseline to build from it if the council agrees to some sort of an ad hoc committee. So I think it has value to some sort of presentation just on that education level. Will not only educate, I think, the commission, but the staff as well, as to kind of where we stand in our current situation. And so we can certainly add that, forming the ad hoc committee. We can work with vice chair to make sure the language is good when we get to that point. So far I have the list of accomplishments to date and these two items. Are there additional ones you'd like to add?
I'd just like to I think, comment on that, or at least talk a little bit more about it. So if I'm hearing this right, any individual commissioner can make a suggestion and it goes on the list, or how's that working? I wasn't following.
In essence, you would have to agree. I mean,
well, that's what I'm saying, and I'm not challenging anything anybody said, but I've heard you said an intersection, you said intersection, but if we're not voting on them collectively, question mark? Otherwise, they're just individual ideas. So
it would be. I think tonight the object is the four of you, by consensus, by process, need to develop what you want to speak to the council about. Right. So you should agree on your accomplishments, major accomplishments. You should agree on what you would ask of council, and through your discussions, and then the chairman would go forth in January is the plan right now.
Yeah, I'm only suggesting that two things be added. A list of potential capital projects is being considered by staff and is being reviewed by staff as recommended by commission members. That's it, because there are some.
Yeah, just so you know, staff's intent would, even if you didn't have to do this report, there's a recommendation to, in essence, do a capital project review. It was staff's intent to simply take individual commission members' ideas for projects and include them as part of that discussion. Staff was not, and not that it couldn't be, and maybe that it shouldn't be, but we weren't going to bring a pre-list and then have you all say,
no.
You by unanimous or majority vote say, yes, we want to include that for future discussion. It was kind of like, you know, here's all your ideas, here's some information on all of them. Then that's when you would discuss whether that individual project should move forward to the council in some sort of list.
Because that's on our February or March agenda for the commission, is to recommend capital projects to the city.
Currently January, yes. But that was staff's approach, is to not, in essence, censor anything at that level. We would just accept all the input, come back with all of the information, reasonable information on all the requests, and then the commission as a whole at that time would then say, yeah, you know, we think that's too expensive, or no, that doesn't make sense, here, and get it down to some core level. And we would expect projects to fall off of what I'll call a wish list. Even I've got a wish list that I know isn't going to get built. So that was our original approach. If the commission wants to change that approach, we could certainly entertain.
And I apologize. I thought the intent was this is an accomplishments report, and that's great. I'm all for that. And then I thought I heard Jordan was suggesting he wants to add something on here to go to the council.
For direction, which is the other aspect of this report.
Right, but that's, I thought, different than what I think the chair is suggesting. At least that's what I'm now hearing. Is he's suggesting to put it onto a list, you'll come back and say, here's the list, come back and debate that list at a subsequent meeting?
So I think there's two things going on, right? I think Dave's referring to the CIP suggestion that we're going to do in the spring, right, and bring that to council. Tonight, before us, you need to agree on if you want to suggest to council, before we go and talk to council about capital projects, if you want to throw in, hey, we think you should be looking at X, Y, and Z intersections. You certainly can say that at your update. Yeah. That's what you need to decide tonight, is what you guys have to come up with your speech.
It's okay. Leave the capital thing off because it's going to be on a future agenda. Just put the emergency
you're
committee on.
You're already going to be looking at that. The council will ultimately do that.
Yeah.
It was kind of a belts and suspenders approach, like, hey, you know, when we look at that, we're going to look at these. Are you okay with that? You're right. Maybe it starts to get too long a list, and this is more.
It could get too complicated.
Generic, so.
Yeah.
Okay. So right now we have the accomplishments and the request for the emergency ad hoc committee.
Okay, and I'm generally inclined to support it, but Mr. Wheeler, you mentioned earlier whether that's really within the purview here or not. So I just want to explore that. What's your view on whether this request is in the purview of this body?
I think it's certainly on the outer bounds of it. But I think this is the perfect opportunity to say, this is important to the commissioner, or from the commission's perspective, this is important or not. And, you know, we would suggest you do this. Here's a suggestion. You can go as far as you want. I think it's pretty open-ended in terms of, here's our ideas, and the council, it's up to the council to say, great idea, form a subcommittee or go to OCFA and come back with a report, or sign it back. It would be the council's purview, I think. So
I just want to make sure that we're staying in our lane, no pun intended.
I think if you did an absolute strictest possible interpretation of the guidelines that set up the Traffic and Parking Commission, you're probably outside that.
And that's where I just want to make sure, because I don't want to set a precedent where then next thing you know we're going to recommend how to program a park. That's not our job, and we shouldn't be doing that.
But it does relate to traffic issues.
And there's a thread there. I get we're trying to connect the dots, so that's why I'm okay with it. I'm just, and then so specifically, what's going to be the recommendation? Just because I heard the commissioners say that he had specific individuals he wanted on it, and I don't know that I want to support who specifically is going to be on it, the composition of it. So
I think it would probably be, to your point, it would be an ad hoc committee of members to be decided perhaps by the council and not specific council members, and whether or not it includes members of the public, staff only, a commission person,
all that.
2 council members, 1 council member. So that's a little, I think perhaps it's more generic that it be formed and that the council consider including a commission, something like that. I think you could get to that without being that specific.
Yeah, I will. I'm prepared to support the recommendation that an ad hoc be considered by the city council, and I would just leave it at that and let them decide who and how many and how often and how long and all the rest.
There's budget considerations that they'll need to take into consideration.
Especially
There's a lot of things before you get into the details of how you solve that problem.
We're going to be tapping into OCFA and the Sheriff's Department, a bunch of others. There's a lot of other resources that need to be mobilized.
Right.
As well.
So I think we have consensus on that. Commissioners? Okay. You okay there, Mr. Rogers?
We got you covered.
And with that, I think we're
Let me, because you're looking to Dave.
Well, just to craft the actual language for that ad hoc committee, and it will be very short.
So is your intention to come back, or because we're not meeting again, so I want to make sure. Are you going to give a report back of kind of what we summarized here for the chairman to come back in January?
It would, in essence, be.
Is that your thought?
The equivalent of
who's writing this? I guess I don't want it to fall through the cracks.
In essence, it's in essence kind of sort of written, but we would work with the chairman in this case, to come up with something that is kind of a speech version of what's in here plus whatever that is.
Very good. Is that
that's fine.
Perfect.
Is there an opportunity? It depends on what the makeup is of the commission in January, correct? Because that could be different.
We know for sure there'll be one person.
Well, just to go over the schedule, the council right now is scheduled to select the new members January 15th, their second meeting in January. That's also the same evening where the chairman would speak, where we would give a report back. So right now it's tentatively scheduled for that. So we wouldn't have a seating of the next commissioners until our January 24th meeting, the following week.
So if this...
That's the current schedule.
If
it depends on the order on the
exactly. If the chair from this commission makes a presentation for the selection of the new commissioners, then the issue is avoided.
That is how it's currently scheduled. So that we will come under presentations, which is the first item on the agenda.
There you go.
We actually looked at this, and then so that's presentations, and then all the other work happens afterwards.
The only reason why I was asking is I'd like just to be present in case there's other questions or to speak on it during public comment if it's just delivered from the chairman.
Junior, when these reports are given, the council says thank you very much, and there's very few questions from what I've seen.
Typically. Correct. That's a presentation item, so it's really not a Brown Act designed for discussion. Council will hear you, and then under their own council comments can come up with, hey, I really like that idea, I like that idea, can you agendize this for future discussion? That's really how it would go. It's not going to be a back and forth discussion item.
But it doesn't mean you can't comment. Obviously, anyone can comment in the public meeting.
Okay. Is there any other council comments concluding the meeting? Okay. Motion to adjourn. So moved by Mr. Teddemer and seconded by Mr. Morper.
Thank you
very
all.
much.
We will.